My name is Tara. I am 30 years old. My sister-in-law constantly drove a wedge between my husband and me. In the end, he slid a petition for divorce across a steakhouse table expecting me to beg. I agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, her son received a $10,000 tuition bill and she fainted on the polished marble floor. The crystal chandelier above our private booth at Prime Cut Steakhouse cast a warm golden glow over the expensive silverware and the remnants of a fine-aged ribeye. I sat perfectly still wearing a simple gray tailored suit that Devon always complained about watching the people I foolishly thought were my family enthusiastically finish every bite of their decadent meal. Across from me sat Monique, my 35-year-old sister-in-law. Her wrists were stacked with designer bracelets. She wore a flashy sequined top that caught the light every single time she moved. Beside her sat Devon, my 32-year-old husband. For the past 3 years, Monique had made it her mission to remind me that I did not belong in their world. When Devon launched his tech startup, she appointed herself as his unofficial advisor and cheerleader. She viewed my quiet nature as a profound weakness. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration dinner for his company. Instead, it was an ambush. Before Devon could reach for his wallet, Monique snatched the heavy leather folder from the waiter. She flipped it open, scanning the total. A cruel, triumphant smirk spread across her perfectly contoured face. She pulled the long receipt out, flicked her wrist, and sent the paper gliding across the white tablecloth. It slid right over the edge of my water glass. The bottom of the paper instantly absorbed the cold moisture. "You are the accountant, Tara," Monique announced. Her voice boomed loudly enough to make the neighboring tables turn and stare. "You pay it. The bill is $4,000. Consider it your rent for living in the luxury townhouse my brother bought when you were unemployed 3 years ago." The silence that followed was suffocating. Diners at adjacent tables paused their conversations. Their forks hovered in the air. I looked down at the soggy piece of paper resting against my glass. I did not cry. As a forensic wealth manager, I was trained to remain emotionless under intense pressure. Monique assumed I was just a low-level bookkeeper. She believed her brother was my absolute savior. I slowly raised my eyes and looked directly at Devon. I waited for him to intervene. I wanted him to call her behavior unacceptable. I wanted him to remind her that marriage was a partnership. I wanted him to defend the woman who had stood by his side. Instead, Devon let out a heavy sigh. He did not look angry at Monique. He looked profoundly annoyed with me. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored velvet jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Without a hint of hesitation, he tossed it onto the table. It landed with a dull thud right on top of the wet restaurant bill. The bold black letters on the front page were impossible to misread. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. "Monique is right," Devon stated coldly. His voice was completely devoid of any warmth. "My tech startup just hit a $10 million valuation this week. The investors are looking at me. The media is looking at me. I need a wife who effortlessly matches my new elite lifestyle. I do not need someone who pinches pennies and wears off-the-rack suits to networking events. You do not fit into my bright future anymore, Tara." He leaned back in his plush leather chair. He crossed his arms defensively. "You have exactly 3 days to pack your things and move out of my house," he added. He said this in a tone that was entirely dismissive. "I will have my corporate lawyers contact you tomorrow morning about a modest settlement, but do not expect a massive payout. I built this company from the ground up. You are not taking a single cent of my hard-earned money." Monique let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She took a slow sip of her martini. Her dark eyes danced with sheer delight. "I told you, Devon," she purred, wiping a drop of liquor from her lip. "She was only ever dragging you down. You are destined for absolute greatness. She is just dead weight." They sat there, a united front, eagerly waiting for my reaction. They expected me to burst into dramatic tears. They expected me to beg for another chance. They expected me to cause a hysterical scene in the middle of a fine dining establishment. They vastly underestimated the calculating woman sitting quietly across from them. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense. I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved a custom platinum fountain pen. The heavy metal felt cool and grounding in my hand. I pulled the divorce papers from the manila envelope. I flipped directly to the last page. I signed my name with smooth, sweeping strokes. There was no hesitation. There was no lingering emotional attachment. When I finished, I capped my pen. I slid the document back across the table toward Devon. His arrogant expression faltered for a fraction of a second. He was clearly thrown off by my total lack of resistance. Next, I reached into my wallet. I pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I dropped it onto the table right next to the $4,000 receipt. "This covers my tap water," I stated calmly. I stood up and smoothed the front of my gray suit. I looked down, staring dead into Monique's eyes. "Monique, I hope your credit limit is exceptionally high this month. Chicago winters are highly unforgiving." I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them utterly confused. I arrived at the luxury townhouse an hour after walking out of the steakhouse. The air inside the expansive foyer felt heavy, thick with the silence of a dying marriage. I did not waste time looking at the framed photographs on the mantel or reminiscing over the custom Italian furniture I had meticulously selected and paid for. I walked straight up the floating glass staircase to the master suite. I pulled my hard-shell suitcase from the walk-in closet and began methodically folding my clothes. I worked with the precision of a surgeon, sorting my tailored suits and conservative dresses, leaving behind anything Devon had ever bought me, which amounted to practically nothing. The heavy oak front door clicked open downstairs. Loud, careless footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by the sharp, aggressive clinking of high heels against the Brazilian hardwood floor. Monique had let herself in using the spare key Devon insisted she keep for emergencies. She did not bother to announce her presence. I heard the distinct sound of the wine fridge opening in the kitchen. She was pulling out a bottle of my imported Cabernet, a vintage I had saved for a special occasion. She poured herself a generous glass, leaving the cork sitting carelessly on the marble island, and marched up the stairs. She leaned against the bedroom doorway, taking a long, arrogant sip. Her eyes scanned my half-empty closet with absolute, unfiltered glee. "Devon is finally free," Monique sneered, swirling the dark red liquid in her crystal glass. "You have no idea how long my parents and I have been waiting for this exact moment. He just paid Jameson's $10,000 private academy tuition for the fall semester this morning. A real man provides for his blood. He takes care of his family. That is something you never understood. You selfishly refused to give me a single dime to start my luxury spa business last year, but my brother always steps up for us." I kept my back to her. I folded a silk blouse and placed it neatly into my suitcase. The spa business she mentioned was nothing more than a thinly veiled scam to fund her extravagant shopping habits. Devon had begged me to invest my savings into her shell company, and I had firmly legally declined. "You are so quiet," Tara Monique taunted, stepping further into the room and deliberately spilling a drop of red wine on the white carpet. "Are you finally realizing that you lost? You thought you were so untouchable because you handled the boring accounting. But Devon is the CEO. He is the tech genius. He is the one making millions and gracing magazine covers while you pack your cheap off-the-rack bags in defeat." I zipped the first compartment of my suitcase, sealing my belongings away. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. I did not give her the validation of an angry outburst. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and unlocked the screen. I opened my private banking application, navigating through the high-security firewall. My thumb hovered over the scheduled outgoing payment section. If Monique had looked closely at my phone screen, she would have seen a very specific recurring transaction. It was a scheduled automatic wire transfer to Kensington Academy. I tapped the screen. A bold prompt popped up, asking to confirm the permanent cancellation of the automatic $10,000 wire transfer. I pressed yes. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation checkmark. I locked my phone and slid it into my blazer pocket. I grabbed the telescopic handle of my suitcase and pulled it off the bed. The wheels glided smoothly across the floor as I walked right past Monique, forcing her to step back into the hallway. She scoffed, taking another slow, arrogant sip of my expensive wine. "Enjoy the house, Monique," I said, pausing at the top of the staircase. I looked back at her lounging comfortably against the doorframe, a picture of unearned victory. Oh, and you might want to check the mail on Monday. I walked down the stairs and closed the heavy front door behind me, leaving her completely alone with her grand delusions. 2 days later, the crisp autumn wind whipped through the immaculate stone courtyard of Kensington Academy. The school was an exclusive fortress of generational privilege, boasting ivy-covered brick walls and a sprawling parking lot filled entirely with imported luxury vehicles. Monique stood near the grand entrance, dressed head to toe in loud, heavily branded designer clothing that practically screamed for attention. She stood out sharply against the other wealthy mothers, who preferred quiet luxury and understated elegance. Monique had cornered a tight circle of these women, forcing them to listen to her. She was holding court, loudly bragging about Devon to anyone unfortunate enough to be standing nearby. My brother is completely revolutionizing the tech industry, Monique projected her voice so the women at the adjacent tables could hear every word. His startup was just valued at $10 million by top-tier investors. We are actually looking at buying a sprawling summer estate in the Hamptons next month. He just insists on giving Jameson the absolute best education money can buy. He spares no expense for my boy, unlike some people who do not value family. The other mothers nodded with tight, strained smiles. They were clearly exhausted by her relentless, tacky boasting, but possessed too much social grace to walk away. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter." The deep, authoritative voice cut through the courtyard chatter. It belonged to Headmaster Sterling. He was a tall, imposing man in a tweed suit who tolerated zero nonsense from the parents. He stood in the arched doorway of the administrative office, holding a thick manila folder in his hands. He gestured for Monique to step away from her captive audience and come inside. Monique beamed, assuming she was about to receive special treatment or perhaps an award for Jameson. She strutted into the polished marble hallway, tossing her hair over her shoulder and giving the other mothers a superior look. "Yes, Headmaster. Is Jameson excelling in his advanced math placement? We have been telling him he has his uncle's genius genes." Headmaster Sterling did not smile. He opened the heavy folder and handed her a formal, heavily stamped notice. "I am afraid this is regarding a severe administrative issue," he stated strictly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The $10,000 tuition payment for Jameson's current semester has bounced." Monique let out a shrill, condescending laugh. She waved the piece of paper away as if it were a minor clerical error caused by incompetent staff. "That is completely impossible. My brother is a multimillionaire CEO. His accounts are overflowing with venture capital. Just run it again." "The payment did not come from your brother," the headmaster corrected her, his tone dropping a chilling octave. "Furthermore, the anonymous benefactor, who has been paying Jameson's full tuition for the past 3 years, has formally and permanently withdrawn their financial support. They contacted our strict finance department directly this morning to sever all ties and cancel all future routing numbers." Monique froze. The blood rapidly drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her heavy makeup. Her perfectly manicured hand gripped the edge of the solid wooden reception desk to steady herself. "Anonymous benefactor," she stammered, her voice losing all its previous bravado. "What are you talking about? Devon pays the tuition. He told me he pays it." Headmaster Sterling adjusted his glasses, looking down at her with undisguised pity. "We have absolutely no record of Devon ever making a single payment to this institution. The funds have always been wired from a private trust under a different name. As of today, Jameson is unenrolled until the outstanding balance is cleared in full." Absolute panic set in. The golden illusion she had aggressively paraded around all morning was crashing down in real time. The other wealthy mothers had quietly edged closer to the hallway entrance, their ears perked, eagerly absorbing the unfolding high society scandal. Monique frantically dug into her oversized designer handbag. She pulled out 3 different gleaming platinum credit cards and slammed them onto the mahogany desk. "Fine. Charge it to Devon's corporate account. He gave me these for emergencies just like this. Just swipe them and get my son back in class." The school receptionist took the first heavy metal card and ran it through the terminal. It beeped a harsh, angry red. Declined, the receptionist murmured, pushing the card back across the desk. Monique swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on her forehead. Try the next one. It is a corporate card. It has no limit. The receptionist swiped the second card. Another red light flashed brightly. Declined. She picked up the third and final platinum card, swiping it with a swift motion. The machine beeped instantly. Declined. All of them. The silence in the marble hallway was absolute and terrifying. The soft, shocked gasps of the wealthy mothers echoed off the high ceilings. Monique looked down at the useless declined plastic cards scattered on the desk. She looked up at the headmaster's stern, unyielding face. The realization of what I meant by checking the mail finally hit her. The air seemed to vanish entirely from the room. Her eyes rolled back into her head, her knees buckled beneath her, and she literally fainted, collapsing into a heap on the polished marble floor. Less than 3 hours after Monique hit the marble floor of the academy, the shock of her public humiliation transformed into blind, erratic fury. She and Devon marched through the towering, revolving glass doors of my workplace in the heart of the Chicago financial district. The Apex Tower lobby was a cavernous expanse of polished granite and echoing silence, a place designed to intimidate. They did not care. Devon aggressively slapped his palm against the solid marble reception desk, startling the concierge. Beside him, Monique was a chaotic mess. Her designer outfit was wrinkled. Her makeup was severely smudged from her earlier collapse, and she was shrieking at the top of her lungs about pressing federal cybercrime charges against her soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law. They demanded to see the low-level bookkeeper named Tara. They assumed I was hiding in some cramped, windowless basement cubicle crunching numbers for a meager hourly wage. When the bewildered front desk security team asked them to lower their voices, Devon completely lost his temper. He shoved past a distracted delivery courier, hauling Monique by the arm through the VIP security turnstiles, right before the thick glass barriers could snap shut. Sirens chirped briefly at the front desk, but Devon ignored them. He dragged his sister into an express elevator and aggressively hammered the button for the 42nd floor. The elevator shot upward, leaving the pursuing security guards scrambling in the lobby. Devon and Monique spent the entire vertical ride feeding each other's delusions. Monique viciously declared that I was a bitter, jealous woman who had illegally hacked Devon's corporate accounts to ruin their lives. Devon firmly agreed, promising to have me thrown into a federal penitentiary by sunset. When the polished steel doors finally parted on the 42nd floor, Devon marched out, ready to terrorize a room full of frightened accountants. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. The space before him was not a dingy back office. It was a sprawling, ultra-luxury executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of Lake Michigan. Abstract modern art lined the pristine white walls. The floors were flawlessly buffed black marble. Devon shook off his brief confusion and marched down the wide corridor. He began screaming my name, his voice shattering the quiet professional atmosphere of the firm. "Tara, get out here right now, you bitter, jealous thief. Turn my accounts back on this second, or I am calling the police." At the far end of the corridor, the heavy frosted glass doors of the primary executive boardroom slid open silently. I stepped out onto the black marble. I was not holding a stack of unpaid invoices or a cheap plastic calculator. I was holding a sleek titanium tablet. I wore a commanding tailored navy suit. I stood perfectly straight, completely unfazed by his public meltdown. More importantly, I did not step out of that boardroom alone. Flanking me on either side were two highly imposing men in sharp charcoal suits. They were not my managers. They were Agent Sterling and Director Vance, senior federal bank regulators, from the Financial Oversight Committee. We had been in the middle of a highly classified briefing regarding offshore compliance. Devon was entirely too blinded by his own towering narcissism to read the room. He did not notice the heavy gold badges clipped to the men's belts. He did not notice the absolute silence of the surrounding executive staff, watching him make a fool of himself. He marched straight toward me, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at my face. "I know exactly what you did, Tara." Devon screamed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You saw my dissolution of marriage petition and you lost your mind. You illegally hacked into my banking portal because you are insanely jealous of my tech startup hitting a $10 million valuation. You are deliberately trying to destroy a successful chief executive officer out of pure spite. Turn my corporate cards back on right now. You are stealing my startup's money to punish my sister. Monique stepped up right beside him, crossing her arms defensively. You are going to federal prison, Tara. She sneered loudly. You cannot freeze a multi-million-dollar corporate account just because my brother finally dumped you. We are calling the authorities right now. Agent Sterling shifted his weight, narrowing his eyes at Devon. He opened his mouth to intervene and demand security remove the intruders, but I gently raised my hand. I stopped the federal agent with a single gesture. I took 2 slow, measured steps toward my enraged husband and his gloating sister. The entire floor was dead silent, waiting for my response. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I maintained absolute chilling eye contact with the man who had discarded me like trash just days prior. I tapped the screen of my titanium tablet, bringing up the master financial ledger. I flipped the device around and held it up perfectly level with Devon's face. The screen displayed a massive spreadsheet filled with bold, undeniable red numbers, indicating a completely drained account balance. I didn't hack your accounts, Devon. I stated, my voice echoing clearly off the glass walls. I simply stopped depositing my money into them. Your tech startup went bankrupt 8 months ago. Devon stared at the glowing screen of the titanium tablet. The bold red negative balance reflected clearly in his widened eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy sound emerged. The 2 federal regulators flanking me remained perfectly still, their imposing presence validating every single digit on that ledger. Devon aggressively shook his head, physically recoiling from the tablet, as if the high-definition screen had suddenly burned him. That is entirely fabricated, Devon stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the device. My chief financial officer just issued the quarterly prospectus on Monday morning. We secured our Series B funding. We just hit a $10 million valuation. You are manipulating the firm's proprietary data to make me look incompetent in front of these federal agents. I did not lower the tablet. I tapped the screen once, bringing up the master capitalization table and the payroll logs. Your chief financial officer quit 3 weeks ago, Devon, I stated clearly. He packed his desk and left the exact moment he realized the primary server hosting bills were bouncing. As for your $10 million valuation, that was never based on actual user revenue. That was a wildly inflated projection based on a phantom capital injection. I lowered the tablet and stepped closer to him. The polished veneer of the successful tech CEO was melting off him by the second. His custom velvet jacket suddenly looked ridiculous against the backdrop of my corporate reality. You spent the last 3 years letting Monique mock me for being unemployed. I kept my voice perfectly level, weaponizing the silence in the room. You let her sit at fine dining restaurants and call me a parasite. You let her loudly tell everyone in your country club circle that you rescued me from poverty and graciously gave me a roof over my head. I turned my gaze to Monique. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a protective shield, her mouth hanging slightly open. When I was supposedly sitting at home unemployed 3 years ago, I was actually sitting in my late father's attorney's office. I was quietly liquidating his entire trust fund. I sold the commercial properties he left me in the suburbs. I cashed out his carefully managed index funds. I paid the massive early withdrawal penalties. I did it all to keep your failing code alive because I believed in our marriage. Devon swallowed hard. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the bright fluorescent office lights. No. The venture capital firm in Silicon Valley funded our seed round. They flew out here. They believed in my specific vision. There was no venture capital firm, I stated mercilessly, my voice echoing off the pristine glass walls of the boardroom. That was a blind LLC registered in Delaware. I set it up. I funded it. Every single paycheck your developers received, every lavish corporate retreat you booked to show off for the media, every aggressive marketing campaign you launched to build your personal brand. It was all paid for by my father's money. You have not generated a single dime of actual revenue in 2 solid years, Devon. Your software has 0 active subscribers. You have been playing a wildly expensive game of pretend on my dime. Devon physically stumbled backward, his shoulder bumping hard into the heavy glass door. The grand illusion of his self-made greatness was evaporating right in front of his eyes. He looked desperately at the federal agents, hoping they would arrest me for fraud or corporate espionage, but they simply watched him with professional indifference. They already had the entire verified paper trail in their briefcases. "What about the townhouse?" Monique shrieked, finally breaking her stunned silence. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and entirely out of place on the executive floor. She shoved past her brother, marching up to me with her manicured finger pointed like a weapon. "You are a liar, Tara." She spat the words, her eyes wild with aggressive denial. "You are making all of this up because you are a bitter, discarded wife who cannot handle being replaced. Devon bought that luxury townhouse. His name is on the deed. He pays the massive mortgage every month. He pays Jameson's elite academy tuition. He is a real provider." She turned to Devon aggressively, grabbing his arm and shaking it. "Tell her, Devon, tell this pathetic woman that you own the property. We are listing it on the real estate market tomorrow morning. The luxury property agent is already booked and coming over to take photographs. We are going to sell that massive townhouse to pay for Jameson's private school, and the rest of the equity is funding the commercial lease for my new luxury spa business." Monique looked back at me, her chest heaving with arrogant defiance. "You get absolutely nothing. You are going to be living in a tiny rundown studio apartment on the bad side of town, while my brother and I cash out his massive real estate portfolio. You are finished." I calmly reached into my sleek leather briefcase. I bypassed the titanium tablet and my platinum fountain pen, letting my fingers wrap around a thick stack of legal-size paper bound by a heavy blue clip. The crisp sound of the paper sliding out of the leather bag made Devon flinch visibly. "Sell it?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. I held the thick document up, ensuring the official state seals and notarized stamps were clearly visible to both of them. "You cannot sell a house that is currently under a federal tax lien." Monique's arrogant sneer vanished instantly. She stared blindly at the blue legal cover, her eyes darting back and forth as she tried to comprehend the words I was saying. "A tax lien." Devon choked out his voice, dropping to barely a whisper. "The property taxes were paid. I gave you the money for the property taxes last year." "No, Devon," I corrected him mercilessly. "You took the property tax money from the company account and used it to buy Monique a brand new Mercedes SUV. You completely ignored the final warning notices from the county for 18 months. The government placed a massive, non-negotiable lien on the townhouse. They were actively preparing to auction it off to the highest bidder by the end of the month." I took one final step forward, invading their personal space, making sure they heard every single syllable of my next sentence clearly. "A lien that I personally bought out yesterday morning," I said, tapping the heavily embossed seal on the front page of the document. "I legally purchased the tax debt from the county. I now hold the deed to the property. I am foreclosing on you." Devon snatched the heavy blue folder right out of my hand. He ripped the cover open, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. The thick parchment rattled loudly in the quiet boardroom hallway. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He looked like a man trying to read his own death warrant in a foreign language. "Look at the second page," Devon, I instructed calmly. "Read the county seal. Read the transfer of deed." He flipped the page, his breath hitching in his throat. "This cannot be real," he muttered, his voice cracking. "The property taxes were $70,000. I authorized that wire transfer a year ago." "You authorized it," I agreed, "but you never actually sent it to the county assessor. You canceled the wire transfer exactly 3 hours after you showed me the confirmation receipt. Then you redirected those exact funds to a luxury car dealership in Oak Brook. You bought Monique a fully loaded matte black Mercedes SUV for her birthday." Monique suddenly looked highly uncomfortable. She shifted her weight instinctively, hiding the keys to that very vehicle deep inside her designer handbag. "I warned you, Devon," I continued, my voice sharp and unyielding. "I warned you that ignoring federal and state tax obligations was a fatal mistake. But you told me I was just a paranoid, small-minded accountant who did not understand how high-level executives operate. You told me the government does not bother $10 million tech founders over clerical errors. Devon swallowed hard. His eyes remained glued to the foreclosure document. They issued 5 separate warning notices, I stated. They mailed them directly to the townhouse. You threw them in the trash because you thought you were completely untouchable. The county officially seized the deed 48 hours ago. They put the property up for a blind tax auction. I formed an anonymous holding company, logged into the county portal, and purchased your debt in full. I own the luxury townhouse, Devon. I own the roof over your head. Agent Sterling crossed his arms, looking down at Devon with pure professional disgust. Ms. Wilson is entirely correct, the federal regulator chimed in. Our compliance audit flagged the tax lien last week. Your financial negligence is staggering, Mr. Carter. You have defrauded investors, ignored federal obligations, and drained corporate accounts for personal luxury purchases. Devon looked up from the paper. The arrogant, untouchable tech CEO was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, terrified boy, realizing the adults had finally caught him playing make-believe. His knees literally buckled. He collapsed onto the cold, black marble floor right in the middle of the executive corridor. Devon, get up. Monique hissed, her face burning with profound embarrassment. She grabbed his velvet jacket, trying to haul him back to his feet. People are staring at us. Stop humiliating yourself. Devon ignored her. He looked up at me from the floor, tears pooling in his eyes. He clasped his hands together in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. Tara, please. Devon begged, his voice echoing shrilly down the hall. Please, you have to stop this. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I was stressed about the business failing, and I let it cloud my judgment. I never actually wanted to divorce you. I stared down at him. My expression remained entirely blank. It was Monique. Devon screamed, throwing his sister under the bus without a single second of hesitation. She forced me to serve you those papers at the restaurant. She has been in my ear for months, telling me you were dragging my brand down. She wanted you out of the townhouse so she could move her spa equipment into the master suite. She manipulated me, Tara. I love you. You are the only person who ever actually supported me. Please just tear up the foreclosure. We can fix this. The absolute silence that followed his confession was deafening. The federal regulators stared in sheer disbelief at the pathetic display. I just looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no residual affection, just a cold clinical validation that I had made the right choice. Monique let out a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson. "You spineless coward!" Monique shrieked. She stepped forward and slapped Devon squarely across the face. The sharp, violent crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed loudly through the glass corridor. Devon recoiled, holding his red cheek, looking up at his sister in shock. "Get up off the floor right now!" Monique screamed, kicking his expensive leather shoe. "You are embarrassing our entire bloodline. We do not need her. We do not need her money, her townhouse, or her pathetic little accounting tricks." Monique turned her furious glare toward me, panting heavily. She smoothed down her wrinkled designer jacket, desperately trying to reclaim a shred of her shattered superiority. "You think you have won because you bought a stupid tax deed?" Monique sneered, pointing her finger at my chest. "You are nothing, Tara. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to cause a scene. Devon's company is going to be perfectly fine." Devon looked at his sister like she had completely lost her mind. "Monique, the company is dead. The accounts are completely frozen. I have zero capital." "Shut up, Devon," Monique snapped. She looked back at me with a triumphant, manic grin. "Mom and Dad are fixing this. I spoke to them on the phone right before we came up this elevator. They are at the bank right this very second. They are cashing out their entire joint retirement fund. They are taking out a second mortgage on their house in the suburbs. They are wiring $700,000 into your corporate account by noon today to save the startup." Monique crossed her arms, looking incredibly smug. "So keep your stupid townhouse, Tara. We are about to be flush with cash. My brother is going to bounce back, and I am launching my luxury spa by the end of the week. You are officially irrelevant." I did not break eye contact with Monique. A slow, chilling smirk finally spread across my face. I tilted my head slightly, letting her arrogant words hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. "Are they?" I asked quietly. Before Monique could fire back another desperate, unhinged insult, the polished steel doors of the express elevator behind her slid open with a soft, melodic chime. Two figures rushed out onto the 42nd floor, their frantic energy immediately shattering whatever quiet remained in the executive corridor. It was Brenda and Calvin Devon's parents. Monique had clearly called them in a panic during her furious ride over, summoning her cavalry to rescue her brother. Brenda led the charge. She was a woman who demanded the room's attention the absolute moment she entered it. She was dressed in a sharp-tailored pantsuit with a heavy gold necklace resting prominently against her chest. Her eyes locked onto me, instantly burning with a familiar toxic hatred. Calvin trailed slightly behind her. He looked visibly exhausted, his shoulders slumped, clutching a worn leather briefcase that I knew held the last remnants of their hard-earned retirement paperwork. Monique immediately sprinted toward her mother. She buried her face into Brenda's shoulder and began sobbing loudly, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy dedication. Devon remained kneeling on the cold marble floor, completely paralyzed by his own unraveling web of lies, unable to even look his parents in the eye. Brenda wrapped a fiercely protective arm around her daughter and glared at me with absolute disgust. "What on earth are you doing to my children?" "Tara," Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the glass boardroom walls. "Monique called me crying hysterically. She said you are trying to steal my son's company and throw them out onto the street." I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, letting her misplaced anger burn itself out against my absolute calm. The two federal bank regulators standing beside me simply watched, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to clinical fascination as they witnessed the total collapse of Devon's carefully curated family dynamic. "You have always been jealous of his shine," Brenda continued, taking a menacing step forward, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "From the day he married you, you have done nothing but drag him down. We pawned our life insurance policies to get Devon his first servers. We sacrificed everything to ensure he had the capital to build his empire. You are an evil, bitter woman destroying a successful black man out of spite just because he finally realized he outgrew you." Her words were explicitly designed to trigger the old insecurities she had spent a decade cultivating inside me. For years, Brenda had made it her mission to remind me that my quiet, analytical nature was a heavy anchor holding back Devon's supposedly limitless potential. She had worshipped her son unconditionally, ignoring every glaring red flag, every failed venture, and every lie he spun. She blamed me whenever reality failed to meet his grand, impossible projections. Calvin stepped forward, putting a heavy hand on his wife's shoulder to steady her. He looked at me, his face deeply lined with years of accumulated stress. "Tara, please," Calvin pleaded, his voice heavy with immense fatigue. "We are at the bank right now. We are finalizing the transfer of our entire pension and the remaining equity from our house. We are wiring the funds to Devon's corporate account to cover the temporary shortfall. Just release the freeze on the accounts. Do not destroy your husband over a marital dispute." I looked at Calvin. Unlike Brenda or Monique, Calvin had never been outright cruel to me. He was simply a man blinded by relentless paternal loyalty, willing to sacrifice his own survival to fund his son's delusions. Calvin had worked 40 years at a manufacturing plant. His knees were shot. His pension was his only lifeline. It almost made what I had to do next feel genuinely tragic. "I am not destroying him, Calvin," I stated, my voice steady and completely devoid of malice. "Devon did that entirely on his own. And you are not wiring any funds today or ever again." Brenda scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively in my face. "You do not control our money, Tara. We are saving our son's company, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop us. We will not let you ruin him." I reached back into my leather briefcase. My fingers bypassed the foreclosure documents and the titanium tablet, finding a thick, heavily bound financial dossier. It was the master audit report, compiled by my forensic accounting team and meticulously verified by the federal agent standing right beside me. I pulled it out. The heavy thud of the paper block hitting my palm silenced Brenda's tirade instantly. I stepped past Devon, who was still weeping silently into his hands on the floor. I walked directly up to Calvin. I held the thick dossier out to him. "Calvin," I said softly, stripping away the harshness I had used with Monique and Devon. "I want you to take this. I want you to open it and read page 4. Then I want you to tell your wife where her retirement fund really went." Calvin hesitated. His hand shook slightly as he reached out and took the heavy file from my grasp. Brenda glared at the folder as if it were coated in poison, but even she stopped yelling. The absolute, unwavering certainty in my voice had finally punctured her impenetrable armor of denial. Calvin slowly reached into his breast pocket and retrieved his wire-rimmed reading glasses. He slipped them onto his face. His breathing grew incredibly shallow as he flipped past the title page, past the executive summary directly to page 4. It was a comprehensive ledger of wire transfers, traced through a complex maze of shell companies directly from Devon's supposedly frozen startup accounts. The silence in the corridor was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ragged breathing of Devon on the floor. I watched Calvin's eyes scan the lines of data. I watched the exact moment absolute comprehension struck him. The color completely drained from Calvin's face. His dark skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that the thick paper rattled loudly in the quiet room. He read the lines again, his lips moving silently, desperately hoping he had misread the irrefutable federal bank records. "Calvin, what is it?" Brenda demanded, her voice suddenly losing its aggressive edge, replaced by a creeping primal panic. "Calvin, what does that paper say?" Calvin did not answer her. He slowly lowered the dossier. He took off his reading glasses, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped them on the marble. He looked down at his golden boy, the son he had sacrificed his life insurance for, the son he was about to give his final pension to. The look in Calvin's eyes was one of pure, unadulterated horror. Devon Calvin choked out, his voice cracking, shattering the silence of the room. "You transferred our pension to an offshore crypto gambling site." The silence in the executive corridor was absolute. Calvin's voice, trembling and hollow, hung in the chilled air conditioning of the 42nd floor. He stared down at his son. Devon was still on his knees, his hands flat against the polished black marble. The pristine reflection of the lake outside mocked the utter devastation happening inside. Devon scrambled forward. He grabbed the hem of his father's slacks, his face slick with sweat and tears. "Dad, you have to listen to me." Devon begged, his voice cracking violently. It was a guaranteed algorithm. The offshore exchange promised a 200% return in 30 days. The investors were sending me final notice letters. The server hosting company was threatening to wipe the entire database. I just needed temporary liquidity to keep the servers online. Calvin ripped his leg away, stumbling backward as if his son had suddenly become radioactive. He dropped the thick financial dossier onto the floor. The pages scattered, displaying the undeniable wire transfer receipts for everyone to see. "You gambled it!" Calvin shouted, his voice echoing down the glass hallway. His chest heaved with a mixture of rage and profound heartbreak. "You took the pension I spent 40 years building on an assembly line, the money your mother and I needed to survive our twilight years, and you put it into a crypto casino." Devon was hyperventilating now, clutching his chest, his expensive velvet jacket ruined by the sweat pouring off him. "I was going to double the money, Dad. I swear to God. I was going to double it on the exchange and put your initial investment right back into your account before you even noticed it was gone." The market crashed overnight. The offshore exchange locked my digital wallet. I lost it all. I lost everything. Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. Her heavy gold necklace clattered against her chest as she brought both hands up to her face. The designer handbag she had proudly paraded into the lobby slipped from her shoulder, hitting the marble with a dull thud. Her entire worldview, carefully constructed around the myth of her genius son, shattered into a million jagged pieces. "We are 60 years old, Devon." Brenda wailed, her voice thick with pure, unadulterated panic. "We signed over the deed to our house yesterday. We cashed out the life insurance policies. We gave you every single cent we had left in this world because you told us you were days away from a $10 million buyout. She looked at her son, her golden boy, the man she had placed on a pedestal above everyone else. She had spent a decade treating me like dirt, constantly reminding me that my steady, reliable career as an accountant was nothing compared to Devon's brilliant entrepreneurial hustle. She had justified his arrogance, excused his financial negligence, and championed his cruel demand for a divorce, all because she believed he was destined for extreme wealth. Now she was staring at a petty thief who had robbed his own parents blind to feed a gambling addiction. "We have nothing," Brenda sobbed, collapsing against the frosted glass wall of the boardroom, sliding down until she hit the floor. "We are going to lose the house. We are entirely broke." Agent Sterling and Director Vance stood perfectly still, their faces carved from stone. They had seen financial ruin before, but the raw, visceral destruction of a family unit happening in real time was a different kind of tragedy. They did not intervene. They were simply there to enforce federal compliance, and Devon had just handed them a verbal confession to wire fraud. Monique watched her parents weeping on the floor. She watched her brother hyperventilating in a puddle of his own making. A normal person would have rushed to comfort their mother. A normal person would have demanded an explanation from their brother. Monique was not a normal person. She was a pure survivalist. She took 3 large steps away from Devon, physically and symbolically, severing herself from the sinking ship. Her face hardened, the panic morphing instantly into ruthless self-preservation. "I had absolutely nothing to do with that," Monique declared loudly, pointing a sharp manicured finger directly at her brother. "I did not know he was stealing from your pension, Mom. I did not know the startup was bankrupt. He lied to me just like he lied to you. He is a monster." Devon looked up at his sister, his eyes wide with betrayal. "Monique, you were the one who told me to take their money. You said they would never find out. You said we deserved to use their retirement to fund our lifestyles." "Shut your mouth, Devon!" Monique shrieked, her voice echoing aggressively. "I am a mother. I have a child to protect. I am not going down for your pathetic crimes." She completely turned her back on her weeping family and focused her manic energy entirely on me. She smoothed down the front of her wrinkled jacket, forcing her face into a mask of desperate entitlement. She actually believed she still had leverage. "Tara, listen to me," Monique demanded, stepping closer. "Devon is a criminal, but Jameson is an innocent child. He is your nephew. You have a moral obligation to protect him. You just admitted you own the luxury townhouse. You clearly have millions of dollars stashed away from your father's trust fund. You still have to pay Jameson's tuition. It is for an innocent child. Do not punish my boy for my brother's sins." I looked at Monique. Her ability to pivot from arrogant cruelty to demanding charity in the span of 5 minutes was genuinely breathtaking. She had spent years mocking my clothes, my career, and my quiet demeanor. She had gleefully toasted to my impending divorce just days ago. Now she was begging me to fund her life. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic, desperate energy. I pulled out a slender manila folder. Unlike the financial dossier, this folder bore the distinct heavy blue seal of the United States Department of Education. "I would never punish Jameson," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air with surgical precision. "But I think the Department of Education might punish you, Monique." Her triumphant smirk vanished. The relief drained from her body as I opened the manila folder and turned it around for her to see. The document inside was a federal school grant application, heavily stamped and flagged by government investigators. "Care to explain why you used my CPA license number to forge your income documents for a federal school grant?" Monique turned the color of old ash. The arrogant defiance that had fueled her entire existence evaporated, replaced by the stark, suffocating terror of a trapped animal. She stared at the manila folder in my hand, as if it contained a live explosive. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, raspy wheeze escaped her throat. I did not break eye contact. I maintained a chilling, absolute calm. When Devon demanded a divorce and ordered me to pack my things, I was incredibly thorough. I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I boxed up our shared tax documents from the home office. Tucked behind the heavy mahogany filing cabinet, I found a silver flash drive. It was not encrypted, Monique. You were too arrogant, too utterly convinced of your own superiority to even protect your own felonies. Monique stumbled backward, her designer heels scraping awkwardly against the marble floor. She shook her head in rapid, jerky movements. I opened the folder, pulling out the heavily highlighted application forms so her parents could see the federal letterhead. You applied for a specialized federal educational grant designed exclusively for low-income, at-risk youth. I continued, mercilessly tapping the federal seal on the document. But to qualify while maintaining your absurd luxury lifestyle, you needed your financial background to look completely different. You needed a professional to sign off on a fictional narrative. So you stole my active certified public accountant license number. You legally bound my hard-earned professional identity to a set of completely fabricated tax returns, claiming you made less than $30,000 a year, all while driving a luxury SUV, wearing custom designer clothes, and planning a high-end commercial spa. You committed federal wire fraud and identity theft, Monique. You risked my entire career to fund your vanity. Brenda, still weeping on the floor over her lost pension, looked up at her daughter in absolute bewilderment. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess, her makeup running down her face. Calvin rubbed his face, looking physically ill. His family was unraveling into a syndicate of white-collar criminals right before his eyes. He had overlooked his wife's vanity and his children's entitlement, believing that hard work would eventually guide them straight. Now, standing in the cold corporate hallway, he realized his entire bloodline was built on a foundation of parasitic theft. His pension was gone. His daughter was facing federal prison. His son was a fraud. He squeezed his eyes shut, refusing to look at either of his children. I did not submit that. Monique gasped, her voice trembling violently, pointing a shaking finger at the documents. You are making this up. You forged those papers to frame me because you hate me. You have always hated me. The federal agent standing beside me did not look amused. Agent Sterling stepped forward, his silver badge catching the fluorescent light. Ms. Carter, lying to a federal regulator is a secondary offense, he warned coldly. Ms. Wilson voluntarily surrendered that flash drive to our fraud division 48 hours ago. We have already traced the IP address of the digital submission directly to your personal laptop. You signed the documents electronically using your own home network. Monique opened her mouth to protest, but before she could formulate another pathetic lie, her cell phone began vibrating frantically inside her leather handbag. The harsh buzzing sound cut through the heavy silence of the corridor, vibrating against the metal clasp of her bag. She ignored it, staring at me with wide, panicked eyes, as if hoping the noise would simply vanish. Answer it, Monique, I instructed calmly, my voice cutting through her panic. I believe the caller ID will say Oak Ridge Elite Preparatory Academy. She flinched visibly. Her shaking hand reached deep into her bag and retrieved the phone. The screen glowed brightly, confirming my exact prediction. She swiped to answer, bringing the device to her ear with extreme reluctance. Her hand was shaking so badly she nearly dropped the device against the marble. Yes, this is she, Monique whispered, her voice barely audible. The voice of the headmaster was loud enough that I could hear the sharp, clipped tone echoing from the earpiece. The color continued to drain from Monique's face until she looked practically translucent. Her knees buckled slightly, leaning her weight against the frosted glass wall for support. No, please, you cannot expel him today, Monique pleaded, her voice cracking into a desperate, guttural sob. I can get the money. I will wire the tuition by tomorrow morning. Please just give me 24 hours to fix this clerical error. I promise the funds will be there. I took a deliberate step closer, invading her personal space, ensuring she heard my next words perfectly over the sound of the headmaster's relentless voice. Tell him you do not have the money, Monique. Tell him your parents just lost their entire pension to an offshore casino and your brother is completely bankrupt. Monique let out a muffled cry as the headmaster delivered his final verdict. The blow struck her with physical force. Her phone slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly onto the marble floor, sliding to a stop near Devon's expensive scuffed shoes. They flagged the grant documents. Monique choked out, staring blindly at the shattered screen of her phone, her chest heaving with genuine panic. The school administration noticed the massive discrepancies in the federal funding application when the primary check bounced. They expelled Jameson immediately for non-payment. And their legal team just handed the forged CPA documents over to the state authorities. They are pressing criminal charges against me today. She sank to her knees, landing just a few feet away from her brother. The two golden children of the Carter family were now both crying on the floor of a frozen corporate office, completely stripped of their wealth, their unearned pride, and their freedom. Brenda wailed loudly, rocking back and forth, entirely consumed by the destruction of her perfect family facade. Calvin simply turned his back to them, staring blankly out the window, unable to process the sheer magnitude of their collective failure. The legacy he thought he had built was a mirage funded by theft and deceit. I looked down at them, feeling a profound sense of closure. The long years of insults, the degrading comments at family dinners, the constant dismissal of my worth. It had all culminated in this exact moment of absolute justice. I had not destroyed them. I had simply held up a mirror and let the authorities handle the reflection. The suffocating despair in the corridor was suddenly interrupted by a sharp, cheerful chime. Devon, still hyperventilating in a puddle of his own sweat, jerked his head up. The sound came from his jacket pocket. He scrambled frantically, his hands shaking as he pulled out his sleek smartphone, his tear-streaked face illuminated under the bright glow of the screen. I watched as his eyes darted back and forth across a new text message. The absolute terror in his expression morphed, twisting into a sudden manic gleam of desperate hope. He wiped his nose on his ruined velvet sleeve and forced himself to stand up. His legs were shaky, trembling under his weight, but a renewed toxic arrogance began to seep back into his posture. He puffed out his chest, desperately clinging to the delusion of his own brilliance. He looked directly at me, a twisted, victorious smile breaking through his tears. "It is Mr. Kensington," Devon announced, his voice breathy and erratic, echoing loudly in the quiet space. "The billionaire investor from Silicon Valley, the one who loved our initial pitch deck." Devon held the phone up like a protective shield, his eyes wide and feverish, pointing the screen in my general direction. "He just texted me directly from his private jet. He is in the building. He is coming up to this floor right now. He wants to buy the startup outright for $5 million. He is bringing the signed term sheet right now." Devon let out a breathless, hysterical laugh, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "We are saved. Do you hear me, Tara? The company is saved. I am going to pay back the pension. I am going to pay off Monique's fraud case. I am walking away from you, a multi-million-dollar founder. You get absolutely nothing." Monique stared at the federal seal on the folder. The manic energy that had fueled her entire existence vanished, leaving behind nothing but the hollow shell of a woman who finally realized she was entirely out of options. She looked at the forged documents, then at the federal regulators, and finally at her parents. Calvin refused to meet her gaze. Brenda was too busy hyperventilating over her lost pension to even process her daughter's impending criminal charges. The reality of federal wire fraud hung heavily in the air, suffocating the last remnants of the Carter family's unearned pride. But Devon did not care about his sister's impending arrest. He did not care that his mother was curled into a weeping ball on the cold marble floor, or that his father looked like a man who had just had his very soul extracted. Devon only cared about the glowing screen of his smartphone. The notification from the billionaire investor had instantly resurrected his toxic, delusional arrogance. He aggressively yanked at the collar of his ruined velvet jacket, trying desperately to smooth out the wrinkles. He pushed his shoulders back, forcing his posture into the rigid, confident stance of a successful tech founder. He completely ignored the devastation surrounding him. He actually stepped directly over his mother's legs, carelessly kicking her discarded designer handbag out of his way as he moved toward the center of the executive corridor. "We are saved," Devon repeated, his voice vibrating with a manic, feverish pitch. $5 million. Do you hear that, Calvin? Get up off the floor? Mr. Kensington is going to inject $5 million in liquid capital into the corporate accounts today. I am going to buy back your pension. I am going to pay off the county tax lien on the townhouse. I am going to bury this entire pathetic situation under a mountain of Silicon Valley cash. He turned his back to his weeping family and faced the polished steel doors of the express elevator. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, attempting to fix his appearance. He was practically vibrating with desperate anticipation, ready to greet the man who was going to rescue his fraudulent empire and validate his massive ego. A soft melodic chime echoed through the silent corridor. The heavy steel doors of the private executive elevator slid open seamlessly. The man who stepped out onto the 42nd floor commanded the space instantly. Mr. Kensington was an older, distinguished gentleman with sharp, calculating eyes and silver hair immaculately swept back. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that radiated quiet, generational wealth. He carried a sleek black leather portfolio under his right arm. He exuded an aura of absolute authority, the kind of power that did not require shouting or posturing to be felt. Devon's face lit up with the frantic, desperate joy of a drowning man being thrown a life preserver. He rushed forward, completely abandoning any pretense of professional composure. He practically sprinted across the marble floor, his hand outstretched eagerly toward the billionaire. "Mr. Kensington," Devon exclaimed loudly, pasting on his most charming, aggressive sales smile. "Thank you so much for coming up personally. You have absolutely impeccable timing. We have the boardroom prepared for you right this way. I have the updated term sheets ready to sign, and I can assure you that the $5 million valuation is an absolute steal for the proprietary algorithms we have developed." Mr. Kensington did not slow his pace. He did not extend his hand to meet Devon's eager grasp. He did not even break his stride. He looked at Devon for a fraction of a second, his expression registering nothing but mild, clinical distaste, before completely ignoring him. He walked right past the desperate tech founder, as if Devon were simply an unpleasant piece of corporate furniture blocking his path. Devon froze, his outstretched hands suspended awkwardly in the empty air. His charming smile instantly morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He spun around, watching the billionaire bypass him entirely. Mr. Kensington walked with measured, deliberate steps directly toward me. The two federal regulators respectfully stepped aside to give him space. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me, squared his shoulders, and bowed his head slightly, in a gesture of profound professional deference. "Madam Senior Partner Mr. Kensington," said his deep, resonant voice carrying clearly down the length of the glass corridor. "I apologize for the slight delay. I brought the acquisition denial forms you requested regarding the Carter startup portfolio. The holding company has officially rejected their plea for a capital injection." He opened his black leather portfolio with practiced efficiency, withdrawing a stack of crisp watermarked legal documents, and handed them directly to me. I accepted the paperwork, my expression remaining completely impassive. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied smoothly. "Your promptness is always appreciated." The silence that fell over the executive floor was absolute. It was a heavy, paralyzing quiet that seemed to suck all the oxygen directly out of the room. Brenda had stopped sobbing, staring up from the floor with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The woman who had spent years calling me an unemployed parasite was now staring at the undeniable proof of my corporate supremacy. Calvin looked completely catatonic, the final shreds of his reality dissolving. Monique was pressing her back against the frosted glass wall, looking back and forth between me and the billionaire as if she were trapped in a severe hallucination. Devon stood frozen in the center of the hallway, his jaw physically unhinged, hanging slack as his brain violently rejected the reality playing out in front of him. His eyes darted from the denial forms in my hand to Mr. Kensington's deferential posture. Senior Partner Devon choked out the words, scraping painfully against his throat. His voice sounded small, broken, and entirely stripped of its former arrogance. "What do you mean, Senior Partner?" My executive assistant, who had been waiting quietly near the boardroom entrance, stepped forward perfectly on cue. She handed me a steaming ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. I took the mug with my free hand, the warmth radiating through my fingers. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the agonizing silence stretch out, forcing Devon to drown in his own confusion. I lowered the mug and met his terrified gaze. Did I forget to mention that detail during our marriage? I asked, my tone conversational and utterly merciless. When you spent the last 3 years assuming I was just a low-level accountant, crunching numbers in a cubicle, you never actually bothered to ask about the corporate structure of my firm. I do not just work at this venture capital firm, Devon. I took one step toward him, brandishing the rejection documents. I own it, I stated clearly, driving the final nail into the coffin of his manufactured empire. I am the majority shareholder. Mr. Kensington is my subordinate. You pitched your failing startup to my acquisition team. And not only did I just personally reject your $5 million bailout, but I also circulated your fraudulent financial records to our entire professional network. I just blacklisted your company from every single venture capital firm in North America. You are completely finished. Devon's eyes darted frantically between Mr. Kensington's stoic carved stone face and my perfectly composed expression. He was desperately searching for a punchline, a crack in the facade, a hidden camera. His brain violently rejected the information, refusing to compute the reality standing right in front of him. But Mr. Kensington simply adjusted his immaculate cuffs and offered a slight, pitying shake of his head. Madam's senior partner personally reviewed your pitch deck last night. Mr. Kensington stated, his deep voice entirely devoid of warmth or sympathy. She flagged 82 separate instances of fabricated revenue projections and inflated user metrics. You did not build a revolutionary tech company, Mr. Carter. You built a sloppy wire fraud trap, and you proudly walked it right into the lion's den. The words struck Devon with the literal force of a physical blow. The last remaining threads of his manufactured ego snapped simultaneously. His knees, already weak from the stress of his collapsing startup, gave out completely. He hit the polished marble floor with a heavy, hollow thud, the sharp sound echoing down the glass corridor. He dragged his hands down his face, smearing his tears and sweat into a pathetic mask of total ruin. His mind was visibly racing, connecting the dots that he had been entirely too arrogant to see for the past decade. He looked up at me, really looked at me as if seeing a complete stranger. The late nights I spent in my home office reviewing thick portfolios. The endless business trips I claimed were just boring corporate tax audits. The quiet, unshakable confidence I maintained while his mother and sister mocked my modest wardrobe and steady career. I had not been balancing ledgers for a mid-tier accounting firm. I had been acquiring technology companies. I had been directing billionaires. He had thrown away a billionaire wife. The realization slammed into his chest like a freight train. He gasped for air, his hands clutching the lapels of his wrinkled, sweat-stained velvet jacket. He had aggressively demanded a divorce, forfeited his entire financial future, and completely destroyed his parents' retirement, all to chase a delusion of grandeur fed to him by his vicious sister. He had traded a legitimate, massively wealthy empire for a fragile house of cards that had just imploded. Monique lied to me. Devon wheezed, his breathing accelerating into a dangerous, erratic rhythm. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at his sister, who was still pinned against the frosted glass wall in terror. She told me I was a genius. She told me your accounting job was holding me back. She said I deserved better than a plain, boring wife. I gave up absolutely everything because she told me I was destined to be a billionaire. And you were the billionaire the whole time. He doubled over, pressing his forehead against the cold floor, gasping desperately for oxygen. A full-blown panic attack seized his body. His chest heaved violently as he sobbed, mourning the unimaginable wealth, power, and security he had voluntarily handed back to me on a silver platter. Monique watched her brother collapse into a weeping puddle, her own panic reaching a fever pitch. The federal agents were standing just a few feet away, silently observing the complete unraveling of the Carter siblings. The threat of federal prison for the forged school grant and the stolen CPA license was a ticking time bomb, and Monique knew she had absolutely no leverage left. She had no money, no powerful allies, and her primary source of future funding was currently hyperventilating on the floor in a ruined suit. Her survival instinct kicked in raw, ugly, and entirely selfish. She pushed herself off the glass wall, her eyes wild and frantic. She looked at her weeping parents, her broken brother, and the federal agents who were preparing to formally process her identity theft. She refused to go down with this sinking ship. "I am leaving!" Monique screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical, shattering the oppressive silence of the corridor. "I am not doing this. You are all crazy. You are completely toxic. I have a commercial spa to open. I have a luxury brand to maintain. I am not going down with you pathetic losers." She did not look at her mother, who was still silently crying over her evaporated pension fund. She did not offer a single hand of comfort to her brother. She clutched her heavy designer handbag tightly against her chest, spun around on her expensive heels, and practically sprinted toward the far end of the corridor. She slammed her palm against the elevator call button, frantically tapping it over and over until the steel doors slid open. She threw herself inside. Her face twisted in a mask of terrified denial, and the doors closed, swallowing her whole. The silence returned to the 42nd floor, heavy and final. Mr. Kensington stood quietly beside me, the consummate professional awaiting further instructions. Agent Sterling and Director Vance remained at their posts, their expressions unreadable. Calvin and Brenda were frozen in their respective states of absolute shock and despair. I took another slow sip of my coffee, the warm liquid grounding me in the moment. I turned toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the entire eastern wall of the executive corridor. They offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the bustling city streets 42 floors below. "If you would like to see exactly how your daughter's luxury brand maintenance is going, I suggest you look out the window," I said quietly, my voice perfectly level and calm. Calvin slowly raised his heavy head. The sheer, undeniable authority in my tone compelled him to move. He staggered to his feet, his joints popping, and shuffled slowly toward the glass. Brenda wiped her ruined makeup with the back of her hand and followed him, leaning heavily against the metal window frame for physical support. Even Devon, still gasping for air and wiping snot from his face, crawled awkwardly across the marble until he could pull himself up against the glass barrier. Down on the street level, the bright afternoon sun gleamed off a pristine, brand-new white Mercedes SUV. It was illegally parked in the executive loading zone directly in front of our building, a clear, shining testament to Monique's relentless entitlement. We watched from above as Monique burst out of the revolving glass doors. She marched aggressively toward her luxury vehicle, her posture rigid with lingering defiance, ready to speed away and pretend none of this had happened. But her escape route was already permanently blocked. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck painted a bright, flashing yellow was backed up directly to the front bumper of the pristine Mercedes. The tow operator, a burly man wearing a high-visibility vest, was already securing the heavy steel chains to the front axle of the SUV. Even from 42 floors up, the visual comedy of Monique's total meltdown was spectacularly clear. We watched her throw her arms up in the air, pointing aggressively at the tow operator. She stomped her designer heels on the pavement. She yanked violently on the locked driver's side door handle. She pulled out her smartphone, waving it in the man's face as if threatening to call the authorities or her phantom lawyers. The tow operator simply ignored her tantrum, finished tightening the heavy winch, and pulled a hydraulic lever. The front end of the gleaming white Mercedes was smoothly hoisted into the air. Monique dropped to her knees on the dirty city sidewalk, clutching her head with both hands, her perfectly curated public image completely destroyed in front of a busy downtown intersection. Devon pressed his hands flat against the glass, his breath fogging the pain. He stared down at his sister's very public humiliation, his mind completely unable to process how thoroughly their entire family structure, their wealth and their pride had been dismantled in less than an hour. "Why is her car being towed?" Brenda whispered, her voice raspy and broken, pressing her tear-stained face against the cool glass. "She just bought that car last month. She told us the dealership practically begged her to take it because her credit profile was so exceptional." I smiled, a genuine relaxed expression of pure satisfaction. "I removed myself as your daughter's secret cosigner an hour ago." "Brenda," I said, turning away from the window and handing my empty coffee mug to my assistant. And it turns out the bank did not really appreciate Monique's 400 credit score. Monique did not even stay to argue the credit score. The sight of her precious status symbol dangling from a yellow steel hook overrode whatever functioning brain cells she had left. She let out a guttural, piercing shriek, spun away from the 42nd floor glass, and sprinted for the executive elevator banks. Her designer heels clicked frantically against the polished marble, echoing like rapid gunfire. Devon watched her run. The heavy fog of his own total ruin briefly parted, replaced instantly by a blinding white-hot fury. He had just lost his $5 million bailout. He had lost a billionaire wife. He had lost the townhouse, his dignity, and his future. And the person who had orchestrated every single step of his spectacular downfall was currently fleeing the scene to save her car. He shoved his weeping parents aside without a second thought and bolted after her, catching the heavy steel elevator doors just a fraction of a second before they slid shut. Down on the street level, the midday corporate rush was in full swing. Hundreds of executives, financial analysts, and bankers were pouring out of the surrounding glass towers for their lunch hour. They formed an immediate, captivated audience as Monique burst violently through the revolving doors of my building like a woman actively on fire. "Put it down!" Monique screamed, her voice cracking as she sprinted across the crowded pavement. She threw herself at the heavy-duty tow truck, slamming her manicured hands against the dirty yellow side panel. "That is my personal vehicle. You have absolutely no right to touch it. I will sue you and your entire company into the ground." The tow operator, a massive man chewing calmly on a wooden toothpick, did not even flinch. He pulled a crumpled clipboard from the pocket of his high-visibility vest and tapped a greasy, calloused finger against a highlighted line. "Bank of America says otherwise, lady." He grunted, completely unimpressed by her frantic, wealthy performance. "The primary cosigner formally withdrew all financial backing an hour ago. Your personal credit profile triggered an immediate default clause in the contract. The vehicle belongs to the bank now. Step away from the rig before you get hurt. I am a priority wealth management client." Monique shrieked, tears of pure humiliation, finally spilling over her thick mascara and ruining her makeup. "I have a high-end commercial spa opening next month. You are making a massive clerical error, and I will have your job for this." The hydraulic winch whined loudly, completely drowning out her protests, as the pristine white Mercedes was pulled securely onto the steel flatbed. The operator climbed into the cab and slammed the heavy door, leaving Monique standing on the dirty curb, grasping at empty air, while dozens of corporate professionals watched in bemused silence. Before she could even process the loss of her car, the revolving doors behind her violently expelled Devon. He stumbled out onto the concrete, his expensive slacks wrinkled, his custom velvet jacket stained with his own panicked sweat. He looked like a madman. He zeroed in on his sister, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his chest heaving. "You ruined my life!" Devon roared, his voice echoing sharply off the concrete canyons of the financial district. Pedestrians stopped dead in their tracks. A crowd immediately began to form a tight, eager circle around the two Carter siblings. Cell phones were discreetly pulled out of pockets. The spectacle was simply too grotesque to ignore. Devon marched right up to Monique, jabbing a vicious, shaking finger directly toward her face. "You told me I was a genius," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You sat in my kitchen drinking my expensive wine and told me Tara was a pathetic, boring anchor dragging me down. You told me to demand the divorce so we could upgrade our brand. You told me to take her townhouse. You fed me every single delusion I had." Monique recoiled, but only for a fraction of a second. The loss of her vehicle and the impending federal fraud charges had entirely stripped away her polished veneer. She bared her teeth, turning on her brother with the savagery of a cornered predator. "I told you what you wanted to hear because you are a weak, pathetic narcissist," Monique shrieked back, her voice echoing shrilly over the passing traffic. "You begged for my validation because deep down you knew your stupid algorithms were garbage. You knew you were failing. Do not you dare blame me for your monumental incompetence." "You made me throw away a billionaire," Devon bellowed, grabbing the sides of his head as if trying to keep his skull from physically splitting open. She owned the venture capital firm. She had all the money. I had everything I ever wanted right in my hands. And you made me throw her out like trash so you could feel superior. You threw her out because you are an impotent, insecure little boy, Monique screamed, stepping directly into his personal space, her face mere inches from his. You could not handle a woman who actually worked for a living, let alone a woman who secretly owned the entire building. You could not keep a real woman if your life depended on it. You are a fraud, Devon. A broke, homeless, pathetic fraud. Shut your mouth! Devon roared, taking a highly threatening step forward, his hands balled into white-knuckled fists. You are a thief. You stole Mom and Dad's retirement money. You forged a CPA license to get a school grant. You are going to federal prison, Monique. You are nothing but a cheap criminal in fake designer clothes. The crisp, explosive crack of skin against skin silenced the entire intersection. Monique had planted her feet, wound up her right arm, and slapped her brother across the face with every ounce of physical strength she possessed. The blow was utterly devastating. It snapped Devon's head to the side with sickening force. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive shoes, and crashed hard onto the unforgiving concrete sidewalk. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of corporate onlookers. Several executives actually stepped backward, appalled by the visceral, trashy display of physical violence happening right outside a premium wealth management firm. Devon lay on the ground for a second, his hand clutching his rapidly swelling cheek, his eyes wide with shock. Then a primal animalistic rage took over his features. He let out a guttural roar and scrambled to his feet, lunging aggressively toward his sister. Before he could close the distance, 3 burly security guards in dark suits charged out from my building's lobby. They hit the sidewalk at a full sprint. 2 of them grabbed Devon simultaneously, wrapping their thick arms around his shoulders and physically dragging him backward. He thrashed wildly, kicking at the air, his dress shoes scraping harshly against the pavement. The 3rd guard stepped squarely in front of Monique, holding his hands up like a solid barricade to keep her contained. "Let go of me!" Devon screamed, fighting hopelessly against the guard's iron grip. "I will kill her. I will absolutely destroy her." "You are already destroyed," Monique shrieked over the tall guard's shoulder, her hair plastered to her sweaty face, completely devoid of any elegance or grace. "You are a loser. You are nothing." They looked exactly like what they were, 2 parasitic frauds violently turning on each other the absolute second the host body cut them off. The wealthy, entitled facade was entirely gone. They were just 2 desperate criminals screaming in the street, providing free entertainment for the financial district. The flashing yellow lights of the tow truck had just begun to pull away from the curb, carrying Monique's final status symbol down the avenue. The crowd of onlookers was still murmuring, recording video of Devon being restrained against the side of the corporate building. Then a heavy, unmarked black sedan pulled sharply up to the curb, its tires screeching slightly as it abruptly cut off a passing taxi. It parked illegally right in the red zone, directly in front of the struggling siblings. The 4 doors of the sedan opened simultaneously. 2 men and 2 women stepped out onto the pavement. They were not building security. They were not local police. They moved with a synchronized, chilling precision. They wore dark slacks, collared shirts, and navy blue windbreakers. As the lead man stepped up onto the curb, the afternoon wind caught the edge of his jacket, revealing the bold, stark yellow lettering, printed clearly across the back. He reached to his belt, pulling out a heavy leather wallet, and flipped it open to display a gleaming gold shield. "Devon Carter and Monique Carter?" the man asked. His voice did not carry the heat of the sibling brawl. It was cold, bureaucratic, and utterly terrifying. Devon stopped thrashing against the guards. Monique froze the vicious insults, dying instantly in her throat. "We are with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division," the agent stated smoothly, pulling a set of steel handcuffs from his belt. "We have federal warrants for both of your arrests, regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and the submission of forged federal documents. Place your hands behind your backs." The cold metal of the handcuffs gleamed under the harsh afternoon sun. Devon stared at them, his eyes unblinking, his mind completely incapable of processing the words Internal Revenue Service. He took a stumbling step backward, raising his hands in a frantic gesture of surrender. "There has to be a massive mistake," Devon babbled, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "You have the wrong people. We run a legitimate tech startup. We are innovators. We are in the middle of a massive venture capital acquisition. You cannot arrest me right now." The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp features and a completely uncompromising glare, stepped forward. She flashed her credentials directly in Devon's face. "I am Agent Ramirez," she stated, her voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel. "And there is absolutely no mistake, Mr. Carter. We have been tracking your financial anomalies for exactly 48 hours. Your venture capital acquisition does not exist. Your corporate accounts, however, are a masterclass in federal tax evasion." I walked slowly out of the revolving glass doors, stepping onto the top of the wide granite stairs leading down to the street. The cool breeze caught my blazer as I looked down at the pathetic scene unfolding on the pavement. I had not come out here to gloat. I came out to ensure the execution of my work was carried out flawlessly. Devon spotted me standing on the landing. His eyes darted wildly, connecting my presence to the federal agent standing in front of him. "You—" He breathed out, his face contorting with a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. "You did this to me." "I did not do anything to you, Devon," I replied, my voice projecting clearly over the ambient noise of the city traffic. "I simply did my job. When you slid those divorce papers across the kitchen island and ordered me to pack my bags, you made a catastrophic miscalculation. You assumed I would run upstairs, lock myself in the guest room, and cry over losing you. You assumed I would be too blinded by heartbreak to notice what was actually happening to our joint finances." Agent Ramirez nodded slightly, acknowledging my presence before turning her piercing gaze back to Devon. I did not cry. "Devon." I continued, taking one slow step down the stairs. I made a pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and performed a comprehensive forensic audit of your entire startup portfolio. You see, you were so incredibly arrogant that you left your primary hard drive unlocked on your desk. It took me less than 3 hours to follow the digital paper trail you tried to bury. Monique let out a sudden sharp gasp, her manicured hands flying to her mouth. She backed away from the agents, shaking her head frantically. "You did not just lose your parents' retirement money in an offshore cryptocurrency casino," I stated, looking directly at my soon-to-be ex-husband. "You lost half of it. The other half, the remaining liquid cash from Calvin and Brenda's life savings, you attempted to hide. You knew the creditors were coming. You knew the startup was a hollow shell, so you panicked and tried to wash the remaining capital to keep it for yourself." I turned my gaze to Monique, who was now trembling so violently she looked like she might shatter into pieces. "And that is where your brilliant sister came in," I said, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. "I found the wire transfers, Monique. I found the series of transactions funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the startup accounts and directly into 3 newly registered limited liability companies. Companies that were exclusively registered under your name. You did not just forge a CPA license to get a federal school grant. You set up a network of fake shell companies under the guise of your upcoming luxury commercial spa business." Agent Ramirez pulled a folded document from her jacket pocket, tapping it against her palm. "Ms. Carter established the spa account strictly to launder the stolen pension funds," Ramirez confirmed, addressing the growing crowd of corporate onlookers as much as the suspects. She categorized the massive cash injections as private angel investments for her wellness brand. "It is a textbook money laundering operation executed with staggering incompetence." I smiled down at them, feeling the weight of the last decade finally lifting from my shoulders. I packaged the entire forensic audit, including the IP addresses, the wire routing numbers, and the forged signature logs. I told them smoothly. And I handed it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division 2 days ago. I handed them a fully prosecuted case tied up with a neat little bow. Agent Ramirez stepped forward, her patience entirely exhausted. She grabbed Devon by the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him forcefully against the side of the unmarked black sedan. She pulled his arms sharply behind his back. "Devon Carter, you have the right to remain silent." Ramirez began the iconic Miranda warning, ringing out like a death knell over the financial district. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Devon completely snapped. The pressure, the humiliation, and the absolute certainty of federal prison broke his mind instantly. He did not remain silent. He did the exact opposite. He shrieked, twisting his head around to glare at his sister with pure, unadulterated hatred. It was her idea. Devon screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as the cold steel cuffs clicked tightly shut around his wrists. "Do not arrest me." She made me do it. She set up the shell accounts. She told me how to route the money. She said the IRS would never look at a boutique spa business. She orchestrated the entire thing. Monique let out a feral screech. She lunged forward, entirely ignoring the federal agent standing right next to her. She pointed her sharp manicured nails directly at her brother's face, her own features twisted into a grotesque mask of fury and panic. "You lying, pathetic loser," Monique screamed back at him, her voice tearing through the air. He signed the wire transfers. He had the executive banking authorization. He physically pushed the button to move the money. I just gave him the account numbers. He stole the money from our parents. He is the criminal. Arrest him. Agent Ramirez motioned to her partner, who immediately grabbed Monique by the arms, restraining her easily. "You have the right to an attorney," Ramirez continued calmly, completely unbothered by their explosive confessions. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." They were standing in the middle of the street, actively providing the federal government with verbal confessions and mutually assured destruction. They were handing the prosecution everything they needed on a silver platter. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the lobby burst open. Calvin and Brenda stumbled out onto the concrete landing. They had watched Monique's car get towed from the windows above, and they had rushed down just in time to witness the ultimate collapse of their bloodline. Brenda let out a sound that was less of a scream and more of a dying gasp. She stared at her golden children. Devon was pressed against a federal vehicle in handcuffs, weeping and screaming accusations. Monique was struggling against a government agent. Her designer dress wrinkled her face streaked with black mascara, shouting that her brother was a thief. The perfect Carter family, the dynasty built on arrogant superiority and relentless judgment, was now a public crime scene. Brenda's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the hard concrete pavement, the impact tearing the fabric of her expensive slacks. She did not look at Devon. She did not look at Monique. She slowly raised her head, her face completely ruined by devastation and absolute terror, and looked directly up at me. I stood at the top of the granite stairs, my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely impassive. I watched her look up at the woman she had spent years actively trying to destroy. Tara Brenda sobbed, her voice a ragged, desperate plea that carried over the sound of the passing traffic and the clicking of the handcuffs. "Please, you own the firm. You have all the money. You have to stop this. You have to save them. We are family." I descended the wide granite steps slowly, my heels clicking in a measured, deliberate rhythm that cut through the chaotic noise of the busy street. The midday crowd of bankers, executives, and financial analysts had gone entirely silent, captivated by the spectacular destruction of the Carter family. I did not look at the onlookers. I kept my gaze fixed squarely on Brenda, who was still kneeling on the dirty concrete, her tear-streaked face raised toward me in a pathetic mask of desperation. "Family," I repeated, letting the word hang in the crisp afternoon air. I stopped on the final step, looking down at the woman who had spent the last 36 months treating me like an unwanted pest. Family does not sit silently at the dinner table while their daughter-in-law is relentlessly bullied for 3 years. Family does not smirk into their wine glasses while their daughter calls me an uneducated parasite. Family does not cheer when a divorce paper is served over a steak dinner. Brenda flinched violently, raising her hands to her face as if trying to physically block my words. Her heavy, expensive jewelry clanked against her wrists, a stark contrast to her current position groveling on the sidewalk. I shifted my attention to Calvin. He was standing a few feet away, his shoulders slumped, his face completely drained of color. The arrogant patriarch who had spent years lecturing me about ambition and wealth was now nothing more than a hollow, terrified old man. He had allowed his children to steal his entire life savings, and he had gleefully participated in my emotional execution, believing he was backing the winning horse. "You watch them treat me like dirt." "Calvin," I stated, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You encouraged Devon's delusions. You funded Monique's fake lifestyle. You sat back and smiled while they threw me out of my own home, assuming I would just quietly disappear into the background. You are not my family. You are simply the people who raised the man I am about to bury. Calvin closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking down his weathered cheek. He had absolutely no defense. The undeniable truth of my words pinned him to the pavement, just as securely as the federal agents were pinning his children to the unmarked sedans. However, I am not a monster. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a small, heavy object. The sunlight caught the glint of silver metal. I walked past Brenda, stepping cleanly over her ruined designer slacks, and stopped directly in front of Calvin. He opened his eyes, staring blankly at my outstretched hand. I pressed a single brass key attached to a plain black leather keychain into his trembling palm. This is the key to a 2-bedroom condo in the South Side. I explained, my tone strictly business. It is not a luxury townhouse. It does not have marble countertops or a private security detail. But it is clean, it is safe, and it is fully paid for. It is held in an irrevocable trust under your name. You and Brenda will not be homeless. Calvin stared down at the key, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound escaped his throat. Listen to me very carefully, Calvin. I continued, leaning in slightly to ensure he caught every single syllable. The trust is ironclad. You cannot sell the condo. You cannot take out a loan against it. You cannot leverage it for cash. You will live there, but you will never see another dime from me, and you will never be able to enable your children with my money again. This is my final act of charity. Brenda let out a loud, wailing sob, burying her face in her hands. The reality of her new life, a modest, basic condo on the South Side completely cut off from the wealth and status she craved, had finally registered. There would be no more country club lunches. There would be no more shopping sprees. There would only be the stark, inescapable consequences of their phenomenal greed. Over by the vehicles, Agent Ramirez was methodically patting down Devon, checking his pockets before forcing him into the back of the federal sedan. His velvet jacket was torn at the shoulder, his expensive shoes scuffed from his brawl with Monique. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, as the absolute finality of his situation crashed down upon him. He had lost his parents' money, he had lost his fake company, he had lost his freedom. But as he heard me explain the irrevocable trust to his father, a sudden frantic spark of desperate cunning lit up his bloodshot eyes. His panicked brain violently searched for a loophole, a hidden trapdoor, any possible leverage he could use to save himself from federal prison. He twisted violently against the federal agent's grip, wedging his foot against the doorframe of the sedan to prevent them from pushing him inside. He craned his neck, locking his wild, desperate gaze onto me. Tara Devon screamed, his voice cracking with a manic, feverish intensity that made the surrounding crowd flinch. I will not sign the divorce papers. Do you hear me? I will never sign them. I will rip them up right now. Agent Ramirez shoved her knee firmly into the back of his thigh, trying to force him into the vehicle, but the adrenaline pumping through his veins gave him an unnatural burst of strength. He gripped the roof of the car, refusing to go down. We are still legally married. Devon bellowed, a sick, triumphant grin spreading across his bruised and tear-stained face. He thought he had found the ultimate trump card. He thought he had found his salvation. Spousal privilege. Tara, you cannot testify against me in federal court. The law protects me. You cannot take the stand and verify that audit. I am your husband. The silence that fell over the street was deafening. The crowd watched with bated breath, waiting to see if the desperate, cornered criminal had actually found a legal shield. Calvin and Brenda looked up, a tiny, pathetic glimmer of hope flashing in their eyes. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact with the man who had spent 3 years trying to systematically destroy my self-worth. I slowly reached his hand inside my tailored coat. My fingers brushed against the thick, crisp parchment paper I had been carrying all morning. I withdrew my hand, pulling out a heavy, multi-page legal document held together by a thick brass staple. The bright sunlight illuminated the bold blue ink of the official state seal, stamped heavily across the front page. Devon's triumphant grin wavered as his eyes locked onto the thick stack of legal parchment in my hand. He strained against Agent Ramirez's iron grip, his brow furrowing in deep panicked confusion. He expected standard divorce papers, the kind that required endless mediation asset division, and his reluctant, highly negotiated signature. He expected a drawn-out legal battle that would grant him months of financial leverage and court-mandated spousal support. "I did not file for divorce, Devon," I stated, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the silent street. "I filed for an expedited annulment based on gross financial fraud, willful misrepresentation, and identity theft. You did not just lie about your startup revenue projections. You actively used my personal social security number, forged my signature, and leveraged my pristine credit history to secure the initial bridge loans for your failing company 3 years ago. Our entire marriage was predicated on a calculated criminal deception from the very first day." Devon stopped struggling. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His jaw went completely slack. The realization that he had handed me the exact weapon to destroy him was visibly short-circuiting his brain. The presiding judge reviewed my forensic evidence packet at 8 o'clock this morning. I continued stepping down to the pavement and closing the distance between us. He signed the order immediately. "There is no waiting period. There is no mandatory mediation. As of this morning, our marriage never legally existed. You have no claim to my assets. You have no right to my properties. And most importantly, you possess absolutely no spousal privilege in a court of law. We are nothing to each other. I will be the prosecution's star witness, and I will happily hand them every single document they need to put you away for a decade." The absolute finality of my words struck him with physical force. His legs gave out completely. If Agent Ramirez had not been firmly gripping his arms, he would have collapsed face first onto the concrete. He let out a low, guttural moan, a sound of pure, unadulterated defeat. His last desperate attempt at manipulation had been neutralized before he even thought to use it. "Get him in the vehicle," Agent Ramirez ordered her partner, her voice devoid of any pity. They shoved Devon into the back seat of the black sedan. He did not fight them anymore. He simply slumped against the dark leather, his head hanging between his knees, entirely broken. The doors slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing him inside his new reality. From the second unmarked vehicle parked just a few yards away, a frantic high-pitched wailing shattered the momentary quiet. Monique was thrashing wildly against the federal agent securing her in the back seat. She kicked at the doorframe, her face pressed against the glass, as the agent forcefully rolled the window down a few inches to clear her hands. "You cannot do this to me!" Monique screamed, her voice tearing with raw maternal desperation. She locked her wild, tear-filled eyes onto me. "Tara, please. What about Jameson? What about my son? If I go to federal prison, my baby will go straight into the foster care system. He will be ripped away from his home. You cannot let them take a child away from his mother. You have to help me for Jameson's sake." I walked slowly toward the rear window of the federal vehicle. I stopped just a few feet away, looking at the woman who had spent years treating her own child like an inconvenient accessory. She had consistently dumped the boy with unpaid babysitters, used him as a prop for her fake social media brand, and neglected his basic needs, while she chased phantom luxury and laundered stolen money. "No, he will not go to foster care," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. Monique stopped thrashing, a flicker of confused hope flashing across her ruined face. "I contacted Jameson's biological father 3 weeks ago," I explained, watching the brief hope in her eyes instantly mutate into profound horror. "When I uncovered your money laundering operation, I knew the federal raid was inevitable. I also knew you had spent the last 5 years denying his father any visitation rights out of pure spite, hiding behind expensive lawyers your parents funded. So I leveled the playing field. I personally paid the retainer for the most aggressive, top-tier family law attorneys in the state. I handed them the complete financial profile of your fraudulent shell companies and the concrete evidence of your impending federal indictment." Monique let out a choked gasp, shaking her head in violent denial. The family court judge granted emergency full custody to his father yesterday afternoon, I stated, driving the final nail into her coffin. Jameson is already packing his room. He is moving to a stable, loving home with a father who actually wants to raise him miles away from your toxic influence. He is completely safe from you. A ragged, agonizing scream tore from Monique's throat. It was the sound of a woman who had finally realized she had lost absolutely every piece of leverage, every pawn, and every shield she possessed. She lunged toward the gap in the window, her handcuffed wrists banging against the door panel, but the federal agent inside simply pressed the button. The tinted glass rolled up seamlessly, instantly cutting off her hysterical screams. Agent Ramirez gave me a curt, professional nod, then climbed into the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. The engines of the two black sedans roared to life simultaneously. The drivers pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the heavy afternoon traffic of the financial district. They did not activate their sirens. They simply blended into the sea of cars carrying Devon and Monique Carter away to a federal holding facility. The flashing yellow lights of the tow truck had completely vanished down the avenue. The crowd of corporate onlookers, realizing the spectacle had concluded, slowly began to disperse, murmuring in hushed tones as they returned to their pristine glass office buildings. The silence of the city streets settled in, heavy and absolute. The adrenaline that had been surging through the air dissipated, leaving behind a cold, stark reality. I stood on the pavement for a long moment, breathing in the crisp air. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel vindicated. I simply felt clean, as if a massive, suffocating weight had finally been surgically removed from my chest. I slowly turned my back on the street and faced the granite steps of my building. Brenda and Calvin were still standing exactly where I had left them. They looked like shattered statues. Brenda was no longer weeping. She was staring blankly at the empty space where the federal cars had just been. Calvin was looking down at his trembling hand. He was clutching the cheap plastic keychain holding the single brass key to the Southside condo. It was the only asset they had left in the world. They had been entirely stripped of their fake luxury, their unearned arrogance, and their golden children. They were left with nothing but the devastating consequences of their own boundless greed. I did not say another word to them. I did not offer a parting glance. I simply adjusted my coat, walked up the stairs, and stepped through the revolving glass doors, leaving the Carter family behind me forever. The heavy thud of the revolving glass doors sealing behind me was the last sound I heard before the serene, climate-controlled quiet of the executive lobby washed over me. I did not look back at the street. I did not need to. The Carter family was no longer my concern. 3 months passed. The chaotic, screaming spectacle on the pavement felt like a lifetime ago, replaced entirely by the methodical, sterile machinery of the federal justice system. I sat in my expansive, sunlit penthouse overlooking the city skyline. The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the massive mahogany desk where I was currently reviewing the latest stack of federal court filings. The air up here was quiet, smelling of expensive coffee and fresh paper. It was the exact environment Devon had thought he was entitled to simply for existing. Devon was currently residing in a vastly different environment. He was sitting in a 6x8 cell at the county correctional facility awaiting his federal trial. But even from behind bars, his staggering entitlement continued to generate paperwork. His defense lawyer, an overworked public defender who had drawn the short straw of representing a wildly uncooperative narcissist, had just attempted a desperate offensive legal maneuver. I read through the motion, a cold smile touching my lips. The defense was claiming financial entrapment. They were attempting to smear my name across the public record, painting me as a predatory, hyper-wealthy mastermind who had deliberately orchestrated a complex web of deceit to entrap her naive, overly ambitious husband. The narrative they spun was pure fiction. They claimed I had hidden my wealth to humiliate him intentionally, letting him drown in his startup debts, and then aggressively pushed him toward fraudulent activities just so I could crush him for my own sociopathic entertainment. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to turn Devon into a victim. It was also a massive legal miscalculation. My legal team did not just respond to the motion, we annihilated it. I turned to the next section of the binder, reviewing our counter-filing. We countered the entrapment narrative with a mountain of meticulously documented, irrefutable evidence. First, we submitted the subpoenaed audio and visual security recordings from the upscale restaurant where he had orchestrated his cruel dinner table ambush. The high-definition footage clearly showed Devon aggressively sliding the divorce papers across the table, sneering at me, and demanding a cut of my supposed meager savings, while boasting about his imminent billionaire status. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had initiated the hostile separation entirely on his own accord, fueled exclusively by his own manufactured greed, long before the federal authorities even knew his name. Next, we dismantled his financial timeline. We provided the exact forensic timestamps of Devon's frantic illicit transfers. The documents proved he had actively moved stolen pension funds into offshore gambling accounts precisely 42 minutes after receiving his initial rejection email from a legitimate venture capital board. He had not been coerced by a wealthy wife. He had panicked because he was a terrible businessman, and he had chosen to steal rather than admit failure. Finally, we addressed Monique's involvement. Our filing included the raw, unedited metadata from her forged tax documents. We traced the digital fingerprints directly back to the IP address of her personal laptop, logged into the Wi-Fi, at the very commercial spa she had used as a front for their money laundering operation. It was a complete, inescapable legal checkmate. The federal judge took one look at our comprehensive evidence packet, threw out the entrapment motion with prejudice, and heavily sanctioned Devon's defense attorney for submitting a frivolous, bad faith argument to the court. Devon was left entirely exposed, his victim narrative destroyed facing the full terrifying weight of the United States federal government. The sharp electronic ring of my desk phone broke the quiet concentration of my morning. I glanced at the caller ID display. It was a restricted number routed through the automated switchboard of the county correctional facility. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. An automated voice coldly informed me that I had a collect call from an inmate at the county jail. I pressed the button to accept the charges. Tara Devon gasped out. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, velvet jacket-wearing tech founder was gone. The man on the other end of the line sounded small, frantic, and entirely broken. The background noise of the jail echoed behind his words, the clanging of metal doors, and the shouted conversations of other inmates highlighting his bleak new reality. "Tara, please, you have to listen to me." Devon begged, his words tumbling out in a rush of panicked desperation. He was using his one allotted daily phone call, spending his few precious minutes pleading with the woman he had tried to discard. "My lawyer is an idiot. He just got sanctioned by the judge. He has absolutely no idea what he is doing, and the federal prosecutors are tearing him apart. They are offering a plea deal of 15 years, Tara. 15 years. I will not survive in a federal penitentiary. You know I will not survive in here." I sat back in my plush leather chair, resting my hand on the polished mahogany desk. The sunlight warmed my skin. I did not say a single word. I simply let the silence stretch out, forcing him to listen to the quiet, steady rhythm of my breathing. "I know you are angry," Devon sobbed, the sound wet and pathetic. "I know I messed up, but you have to drop the civil suit. Please, Tara. If you drop the civil suit seeking damages, the court will unfreeze the last of my personal assets. I can use that money to retain a real defense attorney. I can hire a private firm to fight this. I just need a chance. I am begging you, Tara. Please do not let them lock me in a cage for the rest of my life. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please say something." I listened to his entire pathetic plea in absolute silence. The heavy, desperate sound of his breathing echoed through the receiver, punctuated by the harsh metallic background noises of the county holding facility. Devon was waiting for a negotiation. He was waiting for me to offer terms, to demand an apology, or to yell at him. He was waiting for the woman he had manipulated for years to crack and show a sliver of emotion he could exploit. "Tara, are you there?" Devon whispered, his voice trembling with a raw, unfiltered terror that I had never heard from him before. "Please say something. I will do whatever you want. Just drop the civil suit. I am begging you." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the cool mahogany wood of my desk. You wanted a wife who matched your elite lifestyle, Devon? I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of a single ounce of empathy. Enjoy the elite lifestyle of Cell Block D. I did not wait for his response. I pulled the receiver away from my ear and pressed the disconnect button. The line went dead with a sharp, satisfying click. I immediately picked up my cell phone, accessed my carrier settings, and permanently blocked the facility's outgoing numbers. I blocked his lawyer. I blocked his parents. I severed the final fraying digital thread that connected Devon Carter to my life. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city, and took a deep, cleansing breath. The air had never tasted so pure. 4 weeks later, the air inside the federal courthouse was decidedly heavier. The courtroom was a cavernous space of dark oak paneling, polished marble floors, and solemn authority. I sat quietly in the very back row of the gallery, my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I was not required to be here. My testimony had not even been necessary in the end. Faced with the overwhelming, irrefutable mountain of forensic evidence I had provided to the Criminal Investigation Division, Devon and Monique's defense had completely collapsed. They had both taken blind plea deals, throwing themselves entirely on the mercy of a notoriously unforgiving federal judge. Now they were about to discover exactly how little mercy he possessed. Devon and Monique sat at the defense tables, separated by a wide aisle and flanked by their respective exhausted attorneys. They looked completely destroyed. They were no longer wearing designer labels or projecting an aura of untouchable superiority. They wore standard-issue, ill-fitting beige jail uniforms, having been denied bail due to the flight risk associated with their offshore accounts. Devon's shoulders were hunched, his face pale and gaunt. Monique looked visibly aged, her dark roots growing out her hands, shaking violently as she stared down at the scuffed wooden table. A few rows ahead of me, Calvin and Brenda sat huddled together. They looked like ghosts. The stress of the past few months, combined with the reality of their new life in the Southside condo, had aged them a decade. They did not look back at me. They kept their eyes fixed firmly on the floor, drowning in their own public shame. The heavy wooden door behind the bench swung open, and Judge Marcus Thorne strode into the room. The entire courtroom rose. He took his seat, adjusted his reading glasses, and stared down at the defendants with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. Devon Carter and Monique Carter. Judge Thorne began, his voice booming through the silent room like a thunderclap. I have presided over this court for 22 years. I have seen every variation of corporate malfeasance, embezzlement, and financial fraud. But the sheer, unadulterated arrogance displayed in this case is staggering. Devon flinched, shrinking lower into his chair. You did not steal out of desperation, the judge continued, flipping open a thick file on his desk. You did not commit fraud to feed your families or save a failing business that employed hundreds of people. You committed federal wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering purely to fund a lavish, fabricated lifestyle that neither of you earned. You, Mr. Carter, utilized your wife's identity and credit to prop up a hollow shell of a company, lying to investors and banks with a brazen sense of entitlement. You believed you were smarter than the law. You were not. You were simply loud, arrogant, and entirely incompetent. Monique let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her hands. The judge immediately turned his piercing gaze toward her. And you, Ms. Carter, Judge Thorne stated, his tone growing even colder. You actively participated in a scheme to wash stolen money through a fictitious wellness brand. You abused your professional knowledge to establish fraudulent limited liability companies, moving hundreds of thousands of dollars across state lines. But what this court finds most reprehensible, what elevates your crimes from standard white-collar fraud to a level of profound moral bankruptcy, is the source of the capital you stole. The judge paused, letting the silence stretch out, ensuring every person in the gallery felt the weight of his next words. You did not just defraud nameless financial institutions. Judge Thorne boomed, his voice vibrating with anger. You actively targeted, manipulated, and drained the life savings of your own parents. You committed egregious financial abuse of the elderly, stripping Calvin and Brenda Carter of their hard-earned pension and leaving them entirely destitute in their twilight years. You sacrificed your own flesh and blood to maintain a facade of wealth. That level of betrayal demonstrates a complete absence of character and an utter lack of rehabilitative potential. Calvin let out a ragged, choking sound from the gallery. Brenda buried her face in his shoulder, weeping silently. "The defendants will rise," the judge ordered. Devon and Monique stood up on trembling legs. The federal marshals stepped closer, their expressions hard and watchful. "Devon Carter, for the charges of federal wire fraud and identity theft, I sentence you to 48 months in a federal penitentiary followed by 3 years of supervised release and full financial restitution." Devon's knees buckled slightly, his lawyer grabbing his arm to keep him upright. 4 years. Monique Carter for the charges of money laundering and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I sentence you to 36 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release and full financial restitution. Monique let out a sharp, hysterical shriek. 3 years. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down against the sounding block, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot through the room. "We are adjourned." The judge stood and immediately exited the chamber. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of movement. The federal marshals stepped forward, gripping Devon and Monique tightly by the arms, turning them away from the defense tables and directing them toward the side door that led back to the holding cells. As they were forcefully spun around, they both looked up, scanning the gallery one last time. They saw me. I was sitting in the very back row, completely isolated from the rest of the spectators. I was not wearing the muted, neutral tones of a grieving victim. I was wearing a stunning, perfectly tailored crimson suit. The vibrant, blood-red fabric stood out like a beacon against the drab gray background of the courthouse. It was a statement of life, of power, and of absolute, unshakable control. I did not smile. I did not sneer. I did not offer them a single ounce of the emotional reaction they had always craved. I simply looked them dead in the eyes and gave them one final icy nod. I turned on my heel and walked out through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, leaving the stifling air of federal justice behind me. The sharp clack of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound accompanying my exit. I did not wait to watch the marshals shackle them. I did not wait to see Brenda and Calvin weeping in the gallery. The Carter family was a closed chapter, a bankrupt shell company that I had successfully liquidated and permanently expunged from my life. Stepping out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the city plaza, I took a deep breath. The air tasted entirely of freedom. 6 months later, a crisp breeze swept through the newly revitalized arts district, carrying with it the electric hum of genuine innovation. I stood on a raised dais overlooking a massive, meticulously renovated warehouse space. It was a staggering departure from the hollow, rented corporate suites Devon used to desperately project success. This space was undeniably real. Exposed brick soaring skylights and rows of state-of-the-art computer workstations filled the expansive floor. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out over the sea of faces gathered for the grand opening. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the hall. "Today we are not just opening a building. We are officially launching the Arthur Sterling Incubator for Technology and Financial Literacy. I named this initiative after my late father, a man who taught me that true wealth is never measured by the designer labels on your clothing or the cars in your driveway. True wealth is the knowledge you possess, the integrity of your actions, and the tangible value you bring to your community." The crowd erupted into applause. I smiled, feeling a profound, resonating warmth in my chest that no offshore bank account could ever replicate. This center is designed exclusively for the youth in our city who have the drive and the intellect but completely lack the resources. I continued, my gaze sweeping over the audience. Here they will learn advanced coding, software development, and fundamental financial management. They will learn how to build real capital, how to protect their assets, and how to create businesses of actual substance. We are equipping the next generation with the exact tools they need to be the sole architects of their own futures, rather than victims of circumstance or predatory greed. I picked up the oversized silver scissors resting on a velvet cushion nearby. Flanked by the city mayor and a group of beaming teenagers from the inaugural incubator class, I sliced cleanly through the thick crimson ribbon. The rapid flash of press cameras illuminated the room, capturing a moment of pure, unadulterated victory. As I stepped down from the dais, the formal crowd immediately broke into lively mingling groups. Caterers moved seamlessly through the room with trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. I navigated the floor, shaking hands with local business owners and the elite tech instructors I had personally vetted and hired. Aunt Tara. The bright, enthusiastic voice cut through the ambient corporate chatter. I turned to see a small boy barreling toward me. He was wearing a brand new, slightly oversized incubator t-shirt and a pair of pristine untied sneakers. His eyes were bright, his cheeks flushed with healthy color, and his smile was entirely genuine. Jameson. I greeted him, catching him in a warm hug as he crashed happily into my legs. Look at you. You look like you are ready to build a technology empire today. I'm going to learn how to make video games, Jameson declared proudly, pulling back to point at a row of dual-monitor workstations. Dad said I can take the beginner coding class every Saturday morning. I looked up as Jameson's biological father, David, approached us. He was a quiet, solidly built man, with kind eyes and a relaxed, secure posture. He looked absolutely nothing like the frantic, image-obsessed people Jameson had been forced to live with for the past 5 years. David placed a gentle, protective hand on his son's shoulder. "We cannot thank you enough, Tara," David said, his voice thick with sincere gratitude. "Not just for the incubator access, but for absolutely everything. He is thriving. He made the honor roll at his new school last week, and he actually sleeps through the night now. The nightmares are completely gone." I looked down at the young boy. He was no longer a prop used for social media clout. He was no longer a neglected afterthought shoved into a corner while his mother plotted federal wire fraud. He was safe, grounded, and surrounded by actual fierce care. "He is thriving because he is finally in a real home, David," I replied smoothly. "True family is built on protection, consistency, and unconditional love. It is not determined by bloodline, and it is certainly never built on toxic vanity and greed. You are doing the hard work. I just leveled the playing field so you could finally do it." David smiled, a look of profound relief washing over his features. "We are going to go check out the robotics lab in the back. Come on, buddy." I watched them walk away hand in hand. The stark contrast between Jameson's bright, limitless future and his mother's bleak reality in a federal penitentiary was staggering. Monique had willingly traded her own son for 3 years of fake luxury and an orange jumpsuit. I had used my resources to ensure her victim escaped the wreckage entirely intact. "Excuse me, Ms. Sterling?" "Excuse me, Ms." I turned away from the robotics lab to find a sharply dressed woman holding a digital recorder and a leather notepad. She wore the recognizable press badge of one of the nation's premier business magazines. Her eyes were sharp, evaluating, and deeply curious. "I am Sarah Jenkins with the Financial Times," she stated, extending a professional hand. "The facility is incredible. Your philanthropic work is making serious waves across the entire tech sector. But I have to ask the question everyone in the corporate world is currently wondering about." I accepted her handshake, my posture perfectly straight, my expression composed and inviting. "Go ahead, Sarah. You have just launched a massive multi-million-dollar incubator. You have expanded your core firm's portfolio by 40% in the last quarter alone. You are currently sitting at the absolute pinnacle of your industry," the reporter said, her pen hovering over her notepad. "How exactly did you manage to build such a staggering, unshakable empire while simultaneously dismantling a massive financial fraud ring and navigating one of the most highly publicized, scandalous annulments this city has ever seen?" I looked at the flashing red light of her digital recorder, feeling the absolute, undeniable power of my position, and I smiled. I held Sarah's gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough to establish absolute authority. The ambient noise of the grand opening seemed to fade into a dull hum, separating us from the rest of the room. I was no longer the quiet, accommodating wife shrinking into the background of a Michelin-starred restaurant. I was the apex predator in the room. I built this empire because I finally stopped apologizing for my own competence. I stated my voice smooth, steady, and entirely unapologetic. For a long time, I dimmed my own light because I was told that supporting my partner meant making myself invisible. I was conditioned to believe that my financial acumen and my strategic instincts were somehow intimidating, that I needed to shrink so a fragile ego could expand. I gestured toward the bustling incubator floor, watching the next generation of innovators working fiercely at their stations. But I learned that a parasite will drain you dry and then complain that you don't taste sweet enough. I continued the harsh truth of the metaphor, cutting through the corporate atmosphere. The moment I stopped funneling my resources, my intellect, and my capital into a black hole of vanity, the ceiling simply disappeared. You cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of lies, Sarah. Once I bulldozed the rotten foundation of my personal life, the professional empire essentially built itself. Sarah's pen flew across her notepad. Can you speak to the specifics of that growth? The market has watched Sterling Holdings aggressively dominate the venture capital sector over the last 2 quarters. Your firm has moved with a speed that has left traditional investment banks completely paralyzed. Aggressive is the correct word. I confirmed, inviting her to walk with me away from the main crowd. We moved toward the sweeping glass doors leading out to the private executive terrace. When you spend years managing a liability, you develop a very low tolerance for inefficiency. Cutting the dead weight from my personal life immediately translated into a ruthless optimization of my professional portfolio. I stopped playing nice, and I started playing to win. I outlined the exact architecture of my firm's unprecedented expansion. Within 30 days of severing those ties, I reorganized my entire corporate board. I fired any executive who displayed even a fraction of the entitlement I had just eradicated from my personal life. Then I liquidated every conservative low-yield asset I had previously maintained as a safety net. I redirected $150 million into aggressive high-yield emerging technologies. We completely bypassed the superficial lifestyle brand startups that flood this city. I have zero interest in funding another vanity wellness app or a luxury concierge service. I pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the crisp evening air. The terrace offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the financial district. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of rain and concrete. Instead, Sterling Holdings initiated a hostile takeover of 3 mid-level supply chain logistics firms. I explained, leaning against the polished chrome railing. We consolidated their infrastructure, integrated a proprietary AI routing system we acquired from a brilliant group of MIT dropouts, and flipped the newly formed conglomerate for a 300% profit margin. We did that in exactly 4 months. Sarah followed me onto the terrace, visibly impressed by the sheer clinical precision of the maneuver. That is an incredibly predatory acquisition strategy. You deliberately targeted companies with bloated executive boards. I targeted companies run by men who valued their titles more than their profit margins. I corrected her sharply. Men who spent their capital on corporate retreats and PR campaigns instead of research and development. I recognized that specific breed of arrogance instantly. It is remarkably easy to dismantle a company when the executives are too busy looking in the mirror to watch the perimeter. I turned back to face the reporter, ensuring she captured the absolute seriousness of my new directive. Our new investment strategy is entirely meritocratic and inherently ruthless. We are heavily funding female-founded hardtech sustainable energy infrastructure and agricultural biotechnology. We look for founders who have been overlooked by traditional venture capital firms because they do not fit the established comfortable mold. The financial literacy incubator we opened today is not just charity, Sarah. It is an aggressive, long-term scouting operation. I am building a pipeline of raw, unfiltered talent. In 10 years, the teenagers in that room will be launching startups, and Sterling Holdings will have the first right of refusal on every single pitch. I am not just playing the market. I am actively manufacturing the next generation of the market. Sarah lowered her notepad, her digital recorder still capturing every word. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and genuine professional respect. You have essentially weaponized your own capital, she noted. You turned a highly public, devastating personal betrayal into a masterclass in corporate warfare. You used the media frenzy surrounding Devon Carter's federal indictment to quietly corner the logistics market while everyone else was watching the tabloids. Distraction is a highly undervalued corporate asset. I agreed, a cold smile touching my lips. While the public was busy consuming the spectacle of a fraudulent tech founder facing federal marshals, my acquisition team was quietly buying up the distressed assets he and his associates left in their wake. We purchased the commercial spa that Monique used as a money laundering front for pennies on the dollar, gutted it, and leased it to a legitimate biotech firm. I looked out over the glittering expanse of the city. The towering skyscrapers were illuminated against the darkening sky, monuments to wealth, power, and strategy. I owned a significant percentage of the commercial real estate on the skyline directly in front of me. Every dollar they stole from their families, every fraudulent wire transfer they executed, I matched it tenfold in legitimate ironclad corporate acquisitions. I stated the reality of my victory ringing crystal clear in the night air. They played a pathetic, short-sighted game of checkers. I bought the entire board. Sarah Jenkins remained silent for a long moment, processing the staggering scale of the operation I had just detailed. The narrative of the betrayed, naive wife had been completely and permanently eradicated, replaced entirely by the reality of a financial titan. She clicked the button on her digital recorder, saving the audio file. She looked up at me, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Given everything you have built, and the immense personal cost it took to finally break free from that environment, I have to ask one final question. She stepped closer to the railing, standing beside me, as the evening wind continued to swirl around the terrace. Looking back at the annulment, the federal trials, and the complete destruction of the Carter family's reputation, Sarah asked, her voice quiet but piercing, "Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" I did not hesitate. I did not need to search my soul for the answer. I stood on the balcony of the foundation bearing my father's name, looking out over the sprawling, illuminated city that I was methodically conquering piece by piece. I smiled, only that I didn't hand them the bill sooner. The reporter packed up her recording equipment, her expression a mix of awe and deep professional respect. I walked her to the private elevator of the foundation building, offering a gracious, composed farewell. As the polished silver doors slid shut, the quiet, focused hum of the incubator faded, replaced immediately by the anticipation of the evening ahead. I stepped into my waiting car, the vibrant city lights streaking past the tinted windows as my driver navigated toward my penthouse. Today had been a public declaration of corporate warfare and philanthropic dominance. Tonight, however, was exclusively about the spoils of that victory. The moment I stepped through the heavy double doors of my residence, the rich, savory aroma of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and seared Wagyu beef enveloped me. The penthouse was alive with a warm, golden glow, a stark, comforting contrast to the sterile, calculated environments I had meticulously navigated all day. A fire crackled merrily in the massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the vaulted ceilings and the carefully curated collection of contemporary art that adorned the walls. Soft melodic jazz drifted from the hidden speakers, mingling effortlessly with the sound of genuine, unforced laughter. I handed my coat to the staff and walked into the expansive dining room. The long, custom-made walnut table was set impeccably with fine crystal and understated, elegant porcelain. This setting was not designed to impress strangers or to project a fake aura of wealth. It was designed to honor the people who had stood steadfastly by my side when the ground beneath my feet had seemingly vanished. There were no sycophants here. There were no social climbers desperately seeking a foothold or looking for a free ride. This was my absolute inner circle. At the head of the table sat Arthur Kensington, his usual stern, intimidating courtroom demeanor entirely replaced by a relaxed, jovial smile. He was swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, deeply engaged in an animated conversation with the lead architect of my new tech initiative and the senior analysts from my firm. When he saw me enter the room, his eyes lit up with genuine warmth. He stood immediately, raising his glass in my direction. The rest of the table followed suit, a collection of brilliant, loyal colleagues and steadfast friends who had proven their immense worth in the trenches. To Tara, Mr. Kensington announced, his voice carrying the rich resonance of a man who knew the absolute unvarnished truth of the battles we had fought. A woman who does not just weather the storm, but commands the lightning. May your empire continue to grow exponentially, and may your peace remain forever undisturbed. Hear, hear, the table echoed in unison. As glasses clinked, and the beautiful sound of genuine affection filled the room, I took my seat. I looked down the length of the table, taking in the smiling faces, the relaxed postures, the absolute absence of tension or pretense. My mind inevitably drifted back to that fateful evening 6 months ago. I remembered sitting in that ridiculously overpriced, suffocatingly pretentious restaurant downtown. I remembered the stiff, uncomfortable chairs, the judgmental stares of the waitstaff, and the palpable choking anxiety that had filled the air before Devon had even opened his mouth. I remembered Devon sliding those divorce papers across the crisp linen tablecloth, his face twisted in a smug, condescending sneer. I remembered Calvin and Brenda Carter sitting beside him, their eyes gleaming with toxic vanity and unearned superiority as they proudly displayed jewelry bought with stolen pension funds. They had orchestrated that dinner as a deliberate ambush, a calculated public execution of my dignity. They had desperately wanted me to shrink, to cry, to beg for a place in their hollow, fabricated world. They had viewed me as an obstacle, a drab, uninteresting placeholder standing in the way of their imagined billionaire lifestyle. Now sitting in my own home, surrounded by authentic wealth and undeniable loyalty, the memory of their arrogance felt incredibly small. It was a pathetic footnote in a much larger story. They were currently locked in federal holding cells, stripped of their tailored suits, their leased luxury vehicles, and their stolen capital. They were reduced to inmate numbers, forced to reckon daily with the catastrophic consequences of their own boundless greed. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the pinnacle of a rapidly expanding empire, eating a meal prepared by a private chef, surrounded by brilliant, driven minds who respected my intellect rather than fearing it. The dinner conversation flowed effortlessly. We did not discuss brand names, social media followers, or fake startup valuations. We discussed the future. We talked about the new scholarship programs the foundation was launching to support young women in STEM fields. We debated the integration of new supply chain algorithms my firm was acquiring, and we planned the upcoming local art exhibitions we intended to sponsor. It was a conversation rooted entirely in substance, in creation, and in leaving a tangible, positive mark on the world. Mr. Kensington leaned over as the dessert course, a delicate, perfectly risen dark chocolate soufflé, was served. "You look remarkably at peace tonight, Tara," he noted, his sharp eyes catching the genuine contentment radiating from my face. "I have seen many clients win massive, highly publicized settlements, but very few look this deeply liberated." "That is because I did not just win a settlement, Arthur," I replied softly, taking a sip of the rich red wine. "I excised a tumor. For years, I allowed myself to believe that keeping the peace meant sacrificing my own potential. I convinced myself that my silence was an act of devotion, when in reality, it was an act of profound self-betrayal. Tonight, there is absolutely no pretending. There is only the truth." The evening stretched on, feeling like a sweet, lingering dawn after a long, treacherous night. The city outside my floor-to-ceiling windows sparkled with millions of lights, a vast landscape of opportunity and immense power that I was actively shaping with my own two hands. The penthouse was a fortress of safety and undeniable success. Every piece of custom furniture, every drop of vintage wine, every laugh echoing off the walls, was earned through my own relentless dedication and strategic brilliance. I had not just survived the Carter family's pathetic attempt to destroy me. I had weaponized their ultimate betrayal to build an untouchable reality. They thought I was just the background character in their fake luxury lives. They didn't realize I owned the stage. Have you ever had to legally, financially, or emotionally cut a toxic in-law out of your life? Tell me how you took your power back in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of sweet, undeniable justice. The most profound lesson from these stories of betrayal and sweet revenge is that our worth is never defined by toxic family members. When we endlessly seek validation from people committed to exploiting us, we completely surrender our personal power. True empowerment begins the moment we walk away from toxic environments and redirect our energy into building independent, authentic lives. By cutting ties with those who intentionally dim our light, we clear the path for our own phenomenal, long-lasting success and undeniable happiness. Share exactly how you broke free from a toxic relationship to find your true strength in the comments below.